we'll move on, but we just wanted to get together and go over a few basic things training wise, and then spend some time talking about planning. And I don't have like formal presentation, and the SHPO staff is going to be here. They had grant review this morning, so they're going to be here in a little bit. And they don't have like a formal presentation either. We really want this to be more of a conversation, so you can ask questions and we can learn that way and provide information that way, except for the very formal part that we do every year. That's everybody's favorite part. That's Randy is going to talk about coma and conflict of interest. So we'll go ahead and get started. And Randy, which one do you want to start with?
I'm going to do coma first. Yeah. Yeah.
If you want to take one on top, Will, and then just pet some. Just the top, yeah. I didn't get them steak for y'all. I apologize. All right, Jay, mess it up for everybody.
Correct. That's all. All right. I'm Randy Larkin. I'm the city attorney, and I'm tasked with giving you the COMA, Kansas Open Meetings Act, and Conflict of Interest review. Stuff that we do, which, you know, this is pretty dry stuff. So if you have questions as we go along, it might make it a little easier to go through, and at least you have much whatever going on while we go through this. But at the same time, this is important stuff to keep you guys out of trouble, keep the city out of trouble as we go forward. COMA was enacted by the state legislature in 1972, came out of a bunch of reforms that came out of the 1960s regarding local government. And basically the purpose is that the policy behind it is that the business of the people should be done in front of the people, not behind closed doors with a whole bunch of old guys smoking cigars. So that's really the basis of what it is. And so one thing that it should be known that it is the dependent on open government, or effective government depends on a knowing electorate. And that's one of the other reasons why it's done in open meetings, that we want to do the meetings for the public. And is an express violation of the Open Meetings Act to move a meeting, to hide a meeting, to make it inaccessible to individuals that want to come to it. The courts construe COMA liberally and its exceptions narrowly. So if it's a benefit, if there's a close call, the benefit of the doubt is going to go against the government. So anyway, COMA applies when there are two things met. There has to be a covered entity, covered body, and there has to be a meeting, as that term is defined by COMA. Now, a covered entity is any governmental body that receives public funds. So the city of Lawrence receives state funds, federal funds, so it's covered by COMA. And it also applies to any sub-agencies or advisory bodies of the city as well. So it applies to the HRC. So the COMA applies to the HRC as well as all our other advisory boards. So the key usually is whether or not there's been a meeting. Now, meeting, there are three things for there to be a meeting. There has to be a gathering or assembly in person or through the use of interactive communications by a majority of the membership of the Historic Resources Commission for the purpose of discussing the business or the affairs of the body. So again, that has to be some type of gathering or assembly in person or interactively or online or however, by a majority for the purpose of discussing the business of the body. So we'll start with the first part, which is a gathering or assembly. And then we can kind of follow up that thing too as well. A meeting, this is a meeting. You're in the presence of each other. So you'll have this as a gathering or assembly. You have to participate in telephone calls that can be done. Chat rooms, those could be ways of doing it. Interactive communications, all those video conferencing, Zoom, all those can be a meeting or at least a gathering or an assembly of the members.
Email.
Email could very well be, yes.
Reply all.
Reply all. Yeah,
Basically a chat room.
right. That becomes or there's something called serial meetings that we'll get into a little bit. Where people can use emails and commissioners or other people have gotten in trouble with that. So a majority is defined as the next whole number greater than 1/2 of the total. So you have 7 members, half of that's 3.5. So 4 members. So 4 members is what is a majority. So 3 members talk about it. That's not a meeting. Has to be 4 members. And it could be, however it goes.
And if it's a 7-member committee, but only 6 are appointed, is that 6-member?
It's still 4. It's still 4.
Still 4.
It's the number of positions as opposed to exactly how many are filled.
Okay.
It's
Gotcha.
the same as rules for quorum, basically. It's how it applies. So that's basically the, gathering and communications, the majority, that's the easy part. Now, the question is, when is their meeting? It's not triggered by a vote or by any type of binding action or by official action. It could be just the mere discussion among 4 of you about an item that's going to be before you or an item that's just been recently before you that could trigger it. So always be very careful, when you are discussing, it'd be my advice not to discuss the business of the body outside of the public meetings. Now, you send an email and say, yeah, I don't understand this or something. Some of that communication between you is understandable, but always be careful that if there's something that triggers it and moves it along, it could end up being a violation of COMA. So our advice is always the best that you can to keep those communications to a minimum so that they only occur in the public. Now, social gatherings, you are free to have meetings. You could have a party, celebrate something. I think some of the planning commission sometimes gets together and has something to celebrate. As long as you don't discuss the business of the body, that's fine. You can attend seminars together that could even be on the subject of historic resources, as long as you don't talk about anything that's pending or coming before the board or do any of that. So that's all fine. So
Yes, I have a question about that. They're all about to get invited to a housewarming by Lawrence Preservation Alliance with all the Douglas County Heritage Conservation Commissioners.
Yep.
And so they can go, they're going to talk about preservation and they're preservationists.
Mm-hmm.
So as long as it's not an item that's coming before them as a meeting item, is that?
Right. As long as it's not.
I've been to some previous as well, housewarmings.
So no, it's fine for everyone to attend. Do you guys speak at these things? Or do you-
It's all informal.
Yeah.
We're
So
all-
you
We
did-
may chat about, gosh, I wish we could get another
Yeah.
house preserved or,
And that's just like a social gathering. Just don't discuss anything that's pending. Or maybe
Right.
even something that you just recently did, something you did 2 years ago, or fine, a project that came through,
Okay.
some type of deal. That's okay, but just don't talk about anything that's coming up or anything that's pending or something
Okay.
that may come down the road, because that may cause triggers, because that is the business of your body. So those are all fine as you do it. One thing to be aware of is serial meetings. Now, a serial meeting is a series of interactive communications between that may involve less than a majority that end up being triggered and going along. So, for example, Commissioner A sends an email to Commissioner B saying, I don't like this project, we shouldn't go forward with it. Commissioner B sends it to C and says A is voting against it. And then C sends something to D, even though each of those individual communications would not violate Open Meetings Act. As soon as it gets to the 4th member, then that's triggered. And there was, I can't remember I think it was down in Pittsburgh, Kansas. Whole body got in trouble for that, because that's what they were doing. Here's how I'm going to vote on this. They send it to A, and then they send it, maybe the county commissioners were doing that. So be very careful. That's why I try to limit the communications that you have, because once you get past those 4 on a serial communications, then that's a problem. Also, as you discussed, it's not a problem to send email. It's not even a problem to send an email to everybody, although we discourage that. But don't hit reply all, because you hit reply all, then all of a sudden now we've got communications perhaps that may trigger it, it may not, but you just try to avoid hitting reply all so we don't end up having an interactive
I think
communication.
Lynn has trained us well.
Okay, very good, yeah.
In the beginning, I thought I could, if I had questions, I could ask the question of everybody online, in an email. And learned I'm only allowed to ask her the question.
Yeah. That's all good. So yes, so part of the Open Meetings Act is that we have to give proper notice, which is what Lynn does. It's the duty of if an agenda is prepared, it has to be made available to those that are there and that request it. Meeting must be open to the public and it must be held in places that are accessible to the public. You can't hide it in places where they don't have access. You can't have it in a public place behind a locked door or anything like that. Secret ballots are not permissible, and we cannot prohibit the use of cameras or other recording devices. However, you can limit where they're at, so they're not interfering with the meeting as it goes forward. I think some places put aside a certain area for media. I think the city commission room has a little area where people can videotape from and things like that. Agendas are not required. And if an agenda is made, it has to be made available to those who appear or those that request it. And of course, agendas, you are free to rearrange agendas, record items. That's within, once you get to the meeting, you can do that. Have some flexibility, amend an agenda, but they just have to be made available if they are. Now, what happens if there is a problem or if there's a violation? Anybody who's harmed by a decision by the HRC where there's a violation of a coma can bring a private cause of action in district court. The district attorney and the attorney general could also bring an action to enforce the provisions of coma if they decide to. Remedies would include an injunction, orders of mandamus. There's civil penalties that may attach, payment of costs or other appropriate orders, but there's no damages that can be recovered. If an action is brought to enforce coma, give you a heads up, they think these are not serious enough that it will take precedence over the other things on the court's docket. So they'll move things to hear the coma thing really quickly. That's how important it is to the legislature and the policy of the state that these meetings be done in the public. They will move and adjust their dockets to hear it. So if there is a violation, any action that was taken by the HRC can be voided, can be undone. A civil penalty up to $500 can be assessed against each of you that participated in it, as well as the city. And then again, it only has to be a knowing violation. You don't have to specifically intend to violate coma. You just have to know that you're participating in the conversation that happens that causes it. So it's not a specific intent crime. It's just a knowing crime. So if you knowingly engage in a conversation without intending to violate it, doesn't matter. Court can enjoin everything else, and the cost of the action to enforce coma will be assessed to the city and to you. But really what will happen is you'll get your name in the newspaper. It will be embarrassing and you'll have to go to classes. That's what typically happens.
It's the real.
That's the punishment. Your name will be in the paper and you will have to go to classes about coma. So any questions about it? Again, our encouragement is that you keep all communications regarding your business at the open meeting.
So if
Some things can be discussed out.
if one of our firms has a project that's being submitted to the HRC, of course, we're going to be in conversations with ourselves, as long as
Right.
I don't reach out to these guys and I recuse myself from
Right.
that part of the meeting, then
That's absolutely fine. And then we're going to get into the conflicts of interest because sometimes that happens. And with boards like this, sometimes because you have knowledge or specific abilities that the reason you're on this board.
Right.
And, we have a bigger problem with AHAB, the Affordable Housing Board, because they're made up of tenants to homeowners and all the people who get the funding. So they always are having to recuse themselves all the time because they're always seeking money, which was a problem when we set that board. Anyway, so with that, we'll go into the conflicts of interest. Now, this was passed in, let's see, when, I don't know when this was done, 1971, I think, 72 as well. The purpose of the Kansas conflict of interest laws is to ensure that public office is not used for private gain. So under the act, no historic resources commissioner can act on any matter wherein he or she would have substantial interest. So that comes down to what is a substantial interest. So a substantial interest, there's 5 things that trigger it. And those are all listed out. Now, if you file a statement with the county election officials regarding a substantial interest, there is some ability to participate in these matters that you may have a substantial interest. However, if it's your own business or your own firm or somebody you're working with, it's just better to recuse yourself to avoid any appearance of impropriety or to get in trouble. But anyway, the 5 things that are banned by the conflict of interest laws are if you or your spouse individually or collectively have owned within the preceding 12 months legal or equitable interest exceeding $5,000 or 5% of any business, whichever is less, then you have a substantial interest in that business. So if you're a partner in a firm, if you have owned 5% shares in a business that comes before you, though you have a substantial interest, and you either have to report that or recuse yourself. If you or your spouse individually or collectively has received during the preceding calendar year compensation, which is more than $2,000 from any business or combination of businesses that appear before the board, then you have a substantial interest. So if you're getting paid by your firm and your firm appears before the board, you're going to have to recuse yourself from that year. If you receive a gift of $500 or more, you have a substantial interest. So if you go to Dillon's or Hy-Vee and win a shopping spree, I don't know if they still do those anymore, of $500, you have a substantial interest for the next year in Dillon's or Hy-Vee. Someone else gives you a gift from a firm or some other type of deal, you have a substantial interest in that firm or whoever gave you that gift. So that's something to be aware of. If you sit on the board of directors of something other than not-for-profit, then you have a substantial interest. So if you're on the board of directors of, some type of,
Watkins doesn't count?
no, that would not count. Boys and Girls Club, things like that. Those are all fine. Those you're excused. But if you are on one of those boards and that comes up, you might let us know and we'll look into see whether it's fine or not. But most not-profit corporations are okay. And then finally, if you receive commissions, if you're a real estate agent or you sell properties for, a living or stockbroker or something, and you get $2,000 in commissions from the sale of property or the sale of stocks or whatever, then you have a substantial interest in that entity. You would have to recuse yourself. So if you have a substantial interest in those items, for example, if you own, if you own $5,000 in AT&T stock or something, AT&T has property coming before the HRC where they want to do it. You don't necessarily have, it's not like it's your business. You just might have stock in it. It's not going to affect it, but you have a substantial interest in it. You can report that on a form that they have at the county election office. They have a statement of substantial interest. And if you list that, you can actually then hear and rule on it. Now, if it was your own employer or your own firm that you work with, I would say you still recuse yourself to avoid any type of potential problems, especially if your firm is going to make money out of it or do something about it. Now, then we get into the serious stuff. COMA, those are civil penalties. These are criminal penalties. So if you violate the conflict of interest law, it's a Class A or a Class B misdemeanor. It will go on your record. So you can get 6 months in jail, $1,000 fine. So that's one thing you want to avoid, violating the conflict of interest law, because it is a criminal action. If you have any questions, you can always ask us. And I put on this document our office number. You can always call us. You can run through Lynn if you want to, and she'll forward the questions to us. I get a lot of questions from advisory members regarding conflicts of interest. So if you ever have any questions regarding that, you can do that. If you're not comfortable doing that, which I understand, there is a government's ethics commission. You can call them or ask them or write to them, and they will give you an opinion. I can't guarantee how quick they turn those things around. They will give you an opinion regarding it. And if they give you an opinion that you can act on something and then later that's challenged and they were wrong, you'll have immunity because you have that from the Government Ethics Commission, grant you immunity for that. So that's another avenue to get in, answer a question. And that, I think the address and telephone number are here in this thing as well. There's a city ethics policy. It basically means you're not going to violate the law and violate the Constitution when you're sitting on the board. Otherwise, you just fix off.
What if your interest comes in after the room or after the discussion?
Not a problem. As long as you don't. I mean, I don't know how it would happen. I mean, either you're going to make the ruling. If you have an interest afterward, there's not a problem. If it doesn't arise afterward. Now, if it arises before the decision is made, that might be a problem.
Yeah.
So even if you participated in it, and when you do recuse yourself, it's very good to leave the room completely. So as opposed to sitting in the back, because there was a Topeka planning commissioner over in Shawnee County, Shawnee County. And there was something, matter came up. He went to the back of the room and of course he was given signals and everything else and then got into trouble for all that, because he was wanting to have his project passed. Anyway, he got some trouble for that.
Oh, go ahead.
On 3A,
3A? Okay.
so hypothetical question that to my knowledge has never come up for me or like,
Right.
I don't speak for me. That for 3A, for some of us who do work that is adjacent, that seems to talk, it's just the business itself. But so
Right.
say my firm, we're doing work for the city of Lawrence.
Right.
But I don't own any of the
Right.
city of Lawrence. If a different city of Lawrence project, if a city of Lawrence project that our firm wasn't touching came up, is there any indirect, you know what I mean? Like,
Right. Theoretically,
there could be
right.
favoritism, and I would recuse myself if I thought there were.
Right. Theoretically,
But
for example, if you're a solo working in a solo office, I think you're an architect, is that right? Yeah.
Right.
So if you're, had a 2-person office and you do a big project for the city where, you get $50,000 to $60,000, now you're obviously going to be benefited to that degree. Now, if it's a bigger firm and it's spread out around, over a number of architects or another number of other people, then that's probably not a problem, once that's done. But if it's a big enough where you're doing a lot of work, where you're almost an in-house architect or something for that. So if there comes a time where there's a question like that, because you have an applicant who you've done work for in the past and has given you significant fees or commissions or whatever, that'd be a good idea to ask us. Yeah. And then we'll take care of it. Sometimes it won't be a problem, especially if it's in the past year, but it might be an interconnected deal. And there might be some, you approve a project that might give benefit to your firm. There might be an issue going forward. So.
I'm curious if you own a house within the 250-foot context area of a house that's being discussed. I'm just throwing that out.
Oh, right. That by itself is not a conflict under the conflict
Okay,
of interest.
but you might have opinions.
You probably do have opinions, and actually that's why we have community members on the board, and so
Right,
that comes up quite a bit in planning commission
Okay.
items. So that's fine. We want people who have the experience within the community making these decisions. So just the fact that you're in that context area is not a problem. Now, sometimes we've had commissioners say, my neighbors are against this and I just want out. So, all right, you can recuse yourself. Yeah. So no one wants to get into a fight with their neighbors because they sat on a board. That's typically not a reason, but we say, you recuse yourself for the appearance of any impropriety or some type of deal like that. So we're pretty flexible with that because we really want you all to decide as many issues as you can. That's why you're on the board. But if it's right next door to you and you don't want to have a lifelong feud with your next door neighbor, that's understandable completely.
What are the guidelines on presenting your firm's project to the commission when you're on the commission?
That is actually banned under the
Okay.
ethics policy. You cannot do that at all.
Great.
You cannot appear before the board that you represent. So someone else from your firm would have to do that. and you would need to recuse yourself and go to a back room
Mhm.
until that project is done. No discussion, no participating in the discussion or in the voting of that.
That's great.
Yeah. So that way you don't get in trouble with your employer and you don't get in trouble with the board and you don't get in trouble with the ethics commission. So yeah, there's a specific provision in the city ethics that any member of the board can. Any questions? Anything else?
But we can't appear before other city boards.
Yes, you may
Because that's
appear.
our duty.
That is your duty. Yes, you have the First Amendment right to go before other boards, planning commission, anything like that, BZA.
And submit comments and.
Comments, right? Now you can't represent, you have, you make sure that you're.
Oh, well, we're.
This is my personal
Yeah.
opinion. This is not the opinion of the HR.
Right.
You can't do that without having some type of authorization from the
right.
entire board to speak on behalf.
Mhm.
But you can't always appear as individual and everybody has that First Amendment, right? And we encourage that.
Mhm. Okay.
We want public input. All right.
I'm sorry, we were late. My name's Katrina Ringler from the
Hi.
Preservation Office
Yes.
and Gwen Perney is with us today. Before we let you go, we're gonna be talking about making defensible decisions later from a legal standpoint. Is there anything else that like would touch on with that?
You know, I know the code sets forth a number of standards, that you need to control. And that just apply those and the best that you can apply to the facts. You're going to hear the facts and say, yeah, I think this meets it. I think this does not meet those standards. And apply your own personal knowledge and your experience to come to those decisions. And that's, the reason we have all of you on your board is because of those experiences and the ability that you can help the city reach these goals or make these decisions. So anyway,
Does it help to sort of expound on why you agree or disagree when you're making like motions or discussion?
yeah, well, that makes it for a more robust discussion because someone may have, oh yeah, I didn't think of it that way. And that, yes, absolutely. Explain your decisions to the best of your ability.
I was on the planning commission one time in Topeka. I don't remember that, so maybe it was not when I was on there, hopefully. I saw a couple times the city council would send things back and say, can you explain better why you guys made this decision? Because they didn't want to assume what we were, thinking.
That has happened here too, with planning commission. I can think of one case where they just kind of voted. It's like, I don't know why they voted that way. City commission was kind of tied up on something they didn't know. They said, send it back. So what was your thinking here?
Yeah.
So it's always good to explain your thought processes. You might convince another commissioner of what you're thinking, or they might have a point to rebut it that you hadn't considered as well. So that gives a full discussion. And you guys can reach better decisions these ways by discussing. So yeah, we would definitely encourage that. All right. So anyway, thank you everyone for your service. This is a very valuable board. Your time is well appreciated. Thank you. Thank you. You guys have a good Friday. I'm out of here. See you.
Okay,
Bye, everybody.
thanks, Randy. So I think next on the agenda, is, we were gonna talk a little bit, I was gonna talk about commissioner duties as they're outlined in chapter 22. I'm gonna start a little of that and then go ahead, but right now I'm gonna take a break and introduce, or let Katrina and Gwen and I haven't. You okay?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. I'll let you introduce yourself too. I'll let them introduce themselves so you know who's sitting in the room with you. And then we'll get back on track because we're doing okay on time. So Katrina, you want to start?
So as I mentioned, when Randy was in the room, my name is Katrina Ringler. I am the Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer and Director of Cultural Resources at the Kansas Historical Society. And since 2008, I was the CLG coordinator for the state and the grant manager. But when I moved up to becoming division director, we needed to hire someone to replace me. And so that is Gwen. Tell us a little bit about your background. And
my name is Gwen Perney. I'm from Kansas, grew up in Topeka, and then I'm a KU graduate in anthropology, and then got my master's in urban planning from K-State. And I was a planner down in Florida for 18 years and just came back this December and took over from Katrina, the federal grants management and the CLG coordinator.
And then Ife is even newer to our office. You want to introduce and tell us why you're hanging out with us today?
Okay. Yeah, so my name is Ifeoluju Olusonya from Nigeria. I'm a PhD student, candidate now, in the School of Architecture at KU, specializing in history preservation. And I just began an internship with their office where I hope to learn a lot about what they do and how culture and natural resources are, preserved and safeguarded.
We're
So
trying
I'm
to,
happy to learn everything here.
yeah, trying to give them exposure to like lots of different, all of our different programs. And there's a particular interest in sort of like how how government entities preserve like cultural and historic resources. So we're like, hey, we have this great planning opportunity that you can sit in on. That's us.
Started your dissertation yet?
Yeah.
What's it gonna be about?
Well, it's titled Formulation of a Heritage-Led Development Framework. So I'm trying to develop a framework where we can utilize heritage resources for socioeconomic development. And in this sense, I'm trying to broaden the concept of what heritage means, to do more theoretical work on the definition of heritage beyond tangible, looking at the intangible aspect and cultural expressions, but at the same time, trying to ensure that we understand that heritage can be utilized for development. And I believe this would encourage government to invest more, because beyond preserving historic areas of buildings, we have to start looking at it as an ecosystem where we can actually empower, marginalized places and ensure that their skill sets are integrated into a framework that drives development.
That's awesome.
We're very lucky to have.
I was curious if you've had a chance to meet other Nigerian faculty at KU.
Yes, if you've done. You know some?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Obafulabo Soyinka.
Oh, interesting.
Sound a little familiar?
Yeah.
Yeah, she's Wale's sister.
Yes. Yeah.
And Peter Okudu.
Oh yeah, I went for his play yesterday. Had one.
Oh, did you? Okay, great. Yeah, good. So it's fun to connect.
So we'll talk, we're not going to spend a lot of time on chapter 22 because you just did the revision to it. So you're all very familiar with.
Yeah, but I forgot to bring it with my questions on it.
Ellie, will you pull it up and scroll down to Commissioner duties? When we discussed this, there was there are duties assigned in the chapter that staff does a lot of, but the real duty is the commission to make sure that those things are happening. And so you work with staff to make sure that these things take place. What we spend most of our time on is number 9, if you want to scroll down, Ellie, which is the review of projects. And so that takes up most of the time of the commission. We have standards set in chapter 22 for projects that require review under chapter 22. And that's the properties that are listed in the Lawrence Register of Historic Places or within 250 feet or the context area of a property listed in the Lawrence Register. And you have specific guidelines and standards to use to review those projects that are in the chapter. If the property is listed in the Lawrence Register of Historic Places, you can use the Secretary of the Interior standards. And normally in your staff report, we outline that and we identify what standard applies. But just because staff says standard 9 applies to this project doesn't mean that as a commissioner, you shouldn't be considering all of the standards, because it may, standard 1 may apply in your mind when it's something that staff hasn't really discussed in the staff report. So it's your job as a commissioner to look at those standards in total, not just the ones that staff is pointing out in the staff report. So for the listed property, you would use the Secretary of the Interior standards, as well as the design criteria in Chapter 22, and then anything that actually lists in the ordinance that lists the property. So we'll try to include in your staff report if there is information in the ordinance that listed the property. If you'll notice when properties move forward in the ordinance and then the staff report, it talks about one of the common ones is no changes to the fenestration pattern or something like that, or the wide overhanging eaves, or it'll call out something like that. So those that'll be in your staff report. But there again, if it's not, then you know that that's one of the things that you're supposed to be looking at. So you would want to ask staff for that information. If it's in that context area, then you're not using the Secretary of the Interior standards. You're just using those design review criteria in Chapter 22. And there's some written criteria, and then there are the new drawings that are in the chapter. We usually have a link in the staff report to Chapter 22, so you can pull those up, and then we try to pull everything out for you to look at. But I think we spent a lot of time on these drawings when you were going through the revision to Chapter 22. So I think you are pretty familiar with all the criteria. So do you have any questions?
Could we go back to the duties? Because the list of duties, because I think that was some of the questions I had initially asked you when we started reviewing Chapter 22. And so I wanted to, and again, I forgot.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions about the criteria or standards that you have to use to do that duty number 9?
I have a question that someone asked me a question recently, and then I thought maybe we should have made this more clear in Chapter 22. And the question was if the context area applies only to properties on the Lawrence listing, or does it also apply to those on the National Register? That was their question after reading through Chapter 22.
So context area is only for properties listed in the Lawrence Register.
Yeah, so I pointed them to that, but I was wondering, it's not clear.
Okay, maybe we need to look at language then if it's not clear.
Maybe, I don't know. Does anybody else? Maybe it was just
I didn't reread that.
that single person.
Okay. We can get through that.
Especially starting with number 1, just to.
Number 1 is next on my list for us to talk about. It's probably the most important thing.
Right.
That the commission can do. We don't get to spend a lot of time on it.
Exactly.
Usually where this comes into play is if you are helping staff apply for a for a Historic Preservation Fund grant through the State Historic Preservation Office for survey. But one of the things I hope we're going to talk about number 1 this afternoon in our planning project, because one of the things that I would like to come out of this meeting today is for us to start talking about having a plan for how we're going to do this ongoing survey. When we had a historic preservation plan adopted in and I can't remember the date of it. It was in the 80s. There was a plan. And then again, with the original Horizon 2020, there was a preservation plan that looked at areas around the city and identified them as immediate, future. That map is way out of date now, and we didn't stick to that map because things were changing so quickly that it really didn't reflect what was happening on the ground. The last survey that the city did was, some of y'all were on the commission, we did the Barker neighborhood. So we just finished doing the Barker neighborhood. And we just applied for a Historic Preservation Fund grant for University Place neighborhood. It's partially surveyed, but it needs an intensive survey, and hopefully someday a National Register nomination will come out of that. But so coming up with a plan for this ongoing survey, I think is something we're going to want to talk about in your planning part when we do that this afternoon. But it's interesting to note that it is number one on what your commission duties are. So,
Right. And that's
something
why I'd
we
recommend
definitely
something
need
back
to
in
talk
July, you know, to conduct surveys of East Lawrence. So, okay. So what about number 5, determine historic markers? When will we have the criteria for the standards for historic markers? Because we've been doing historic markers, but they're all over the place. So what?
Right, and we are, I'm trying to get that set up now for us to have, we have, I don't know if you know, Kelly Irby did a rubric for the marker committee to consider. So it's just a matter of getting that committee together to look at that rubric and then to look at the types of markers and then start on an application process. So people will have that. So hopefully that's coming soon. It's just been a matter of staff time.
Who's on that committee?
Will is the Historic Resources Commissioner on that as the historian for the HRC. Steve from Watkins is on there as a representative from Watkins. Ferris Mohammed for Equity and Inclusion for the city. We're supposed to have a representative from the Human Relations Commission, but the person that was representing that commission left the city and is no longer on that commission, and they haven't reappointed someone else yet. And then Porter Arneal, representing Parks and Recreation and Culture, is on there.
Lynn, can I just offer, so at the state, we've been talking about historic markers for a long time, there are the official like highway markers that the Department of Transportation and we partner on. But there's always like local markers that people want us, you know, to kind of comment on or give sort of a blessing on. And so we finally have recently come up with sort of an idea, a strategy on how to approach that. And I think the idea is that we will have a consistent design. And then people can come to us and say, hey, we want to put up a marker about this subject or whatever at this place. And then we'll have like a committee, which we haven't established yet, that'll kind of look at that and just make sure that it's based on facts. You know, the language is inclusive and doesn't, you know, skew things too much one way or the other. And then we'll offer that basically, like, we don't have money to put up markers, but we basically will say, yes, you can put up a marker with our design and have it be a state marker. We completely borrowed that idea from the city of Manhattan. They actually have like a style guide. Same concept. If you want to put up a marker in Manhattan, which is also a CLG, you can apply to the Preservation Commission. They review it. And then if they approve it, there's all different sizes and shapes, but they all have a consistent sort of like design to them, like a logo or a theme, color scheme and everything. And that way, if you are driving around town and you see one of those markers, you know it's an official City of Manhattan marker. So that's an idea. If you don't want to kind of reinvent the wheel, you might look at their.
He already has some, you know, some historic markers, consistent historic markers. But that's why we've been, you know, there's so many kinds of criteria, and that's why I wasn't sure, you know, I've been chomping at the bit because I have a list of historic markers I would like to.
We also want to, in the future, have an inventory of all the other kinds of markers, because obviously people have been marking things for a long time.
Sure, right.
There's plaques and there's little markers here and there and everywhere, and some of them might not be true. But you know, it'd be good to put those like on the Kansas Historic Resources inventory. So that could be a project too that the HRC could take on in the future, is to get those inventoried and documented, so you'd have like at least know where they are.
Yeah,
The state doesn't have a markers or create a list of where markers should be. It's a style guide or.
It's a style guide, yeah, and sort of just a,
I think
yes,
you're talking about it just.
Well, I'm talking about all of the above. The style guide, the criteria, the kinds, depending upon what it is. Years ago, Monica Davis shared with me a list of all the markers she knew of in the city of Lawrence. Whatever kinds they were. And so I would like to, see that list. You know what I mean? Like,
Okay, it's online right now that we have on our, on the city's website, on the historic resources page map is a list, shows all the historic markers. The map is under construction right now, so that it doesn't have the links to what the marker is yet, but eventually it will have what the marker is, and hopefully I've been talking to Steve at the Watkins, and we're going to come up with a way to have a photograph and even a kiosk of some type at the Watkins. So the information will be there too. But hey, Ellen, can you go to the cities?
I'm trying. Yeah,
It's a good
sit down or, there are ways. The Zoom thing's about the way.
You'll go to the city maps. It's on the maps part. And scroll down to the historic resources map. And so it has just a spot marker right now.
It was at the top of that legend.
Yeah. So everything is just kind of jumbled together right now, but all of this will get pulled out. They're sorting the data right now.
so,
And
yeah,
so
click the historic marker one. What does it show you there?
Well, it doesn't show anything right now. Right now,
Oh.
it's the dot map. But eventually it will, I have what it, but
the location is.
but there's the location.
Well, even that's helpful.
So we're working on that. We've been working on it for some time, and we're still working on it. Right now, we're working on the map layer, and then hopefully we'll have a photograph of what the marker is, so people can click on it and see what it is, and then go look at it. And then, so that's in process. So if you want to go back to those duties, so that one of the other ones that I wanted to briefly mention was if you'll scroll down to
6 and 7.
You want to say about 6?
Advise. So advise, assist owners of site. So for example, just the recent example was with Jennifer Barton. She had asked me, what information I knew about Stephen Fox. And so I gave her historic information for her house. And we just talked about it. So that's okay. Initiate nominations. Okay, so that's the.
And this is one I want to talk about in the planning.
In our planning, okay.
Because we got a letter from someone who's interested in putting Municipal Stadium on the National Register of Historic Places. So it is appropriate for the Historic Resources Commission to initiate those nominations, especially for that one, since it's a city-owned property. You can do that by resolution at Hobbs Park. You can do that by resolution. Unfortunately, we don't really have the staff time to do those nominations in-house. So our next step then would be to look for funding to hire someone to do that National Register nomination, or a volunteer to do that National Register nomination. And then we would apply usually with for a Historic Preservation Fund grant to hire someone to do that National Register nominations.
So that's again one of my questions. I'm a history rep and I'm drowning in history. So I would be happy to volunteer to write historical narratives. Do you know what I mean? To do the research and here's all the citations and to do that, without being paid for it. So that's why I didn't know would it be a conflict of interest if I was writing a historic nomination for either a Lawrence or a state. I don't know about state, but just for now, Lawrence. If I wrote a Lawrence nomination for Lawrence Historic Place and wrote that as a, as a historian, but I'm on the commission, is that a conflict of interest?
As long as you're not getting paid.
Not getting paid, great. Okay, so that, so I'd be happy to do that,
Okay.
is what I'm saying. And then let's see, number 8. So inform, educate people regarding, sure, easy. Hold public hearings, and that's our number 9 we did. And then design criteria for, what's the rest of the 10 there? That's chapter 22, right? I mean, that's everything else in chapter
Right,
22 is what that is. Okay. Okay. And then
Are we gonna get through everything?
I was just going to ask if y'all had any questions about any of your duties as they're identified in the chapter. And then I was going to go ahead and take maybe a 5-minute break and then let the state jump into all the stuff that they had.
I think the one I had questions about is the survey, the ongoing survey, if that is our plan to create kind of a action plan of how to make it ongoing and not just periodic.
Yes.
yeah, okay. Because again, a lot of these I asked ago, so we're good. Thank you.
Lynn, on number 12, does the city hold easements?
We do not hold any easements right now. That is in here, as well as there's the chapter authorizes a preservation fund that's not funded. They're in here in hopes that at some point in the future, we would be able to do that, but we do not have any easements right now. We have legislative authority, but no power. And everything is city commission approved too. So
Well, what about, where is it written? Where is it written that we don't have any authority to review properties on the University of Kansas?
Right.
that is because it is state-owned property, so local government doesn't review, and Katrina may know.
So it's in the
more,
state statute.
but that's a state statute, not local. We do have a agreement with the with KU about properties within a certain distance of KU that,
But not Memorials.
but not next.
Right, not Memorial Stadium. I didn't know if you'd received any comments about Smith Hall on the KU campus.
Yeah.
They're tearing down.
Smith, yeah.
When they were gonna tear it
That's
down.
when they were gonna tear it down.
Yeah, they're tearing down a lot of historic buildings on the KU campus, and it's really frustrating to us preservationists, and I don't know to what extent the state office has been.
What I would encourage
Receiving.
you as a concerned citizen is to seek out, they have their own preservation commission. They aren't a CLG per se, but they function, they're supposed to function like a CLG.
They ignore it.
Right.
They
We
don't.
We know.
Yeah.
But we as a community, England knows this too, need to put more pressure on them. Because they do have an agreement with us to do state law reviews, just like you all do. If they're not doing it correctly or right, then we'll take it back. I have concerns about their preservation commission, how it's being staffed and chaired
Mhm.
at the moment. That will eventually need to be addressed. But yeah, that is something that we keep an eye on, but I think more people in the community need to attend those meetings and say things, because I don't think they're getting much public input.
Well, they tear down before they've even informed the public they're going to tear it down.
Well, and that's because I
Did
think
with
what has happened in the past is it goes to the regents to say, hey, we're thinking
Right.
about tearing this down.
Yeah.
And the regents say, sure, that's fine. That should be the action that gets the state law review in my
Exactly.
opinion.
Right.
Not when it's comes back to the HRC for a state law review. The state law review should be happening at the regions because that's an action by the government.
Right.
That's not happening. So
Exactly, it's not.
they're well aware.
They're
The
broken.
region's meeting is the public meeting. That
I mean,
the community would.
Because what the state law says is that the state or subdivisions of the state, when they are undertaking or permitting a project, need to, go through this process. So the regions are the state. And so if they are making a decision that's impacting a register listed building, then I would say, not an attorney, but I would say that that's probably when the state law review needs to happen, not when the university is ready to let the bid.
But the public has to know about it, which means we have to go to the Board of Regents agendas and find out what they're up to.
Yeah.
It's extra, and that's why that whole procedure is falling apart.
But the local, or what they call it,
Campus
Historic Resources, they do have a set meeting time and date, and the agendas are not published well and things like that, but if you know when the date and time is and kind of press them, you can get onto their meetings, and then I think, just my recommendation, that I think they need to hear from the community more.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Mark Rice, do you want?
He's the chair, the staff person, and the KU representative, which is the problem, conflict of interest and multiple.
Yeah.
So we'll take about, if there are no other questions about commission duties under chapter 20, I didn't get into state law review because Katrina and Gwen are going to cover that, but any questions about the duties that we have under chapter 22? Other than those that we're going to talk about in the planning part this afternoon. Okay, we'll take about 5 minutes and then come back and let the State Historic Preservation Office wow us with making defensible decisions.
All right. So as Lynn said, she asked us to come over today and talk to you guys a little bit about defensible decision-making, the standards that you're going to use to make those decisions, and then talk a little bit, work with you a little bit this afternoon on planning stuff related to the state preservation plan. And then of course your duties as your CLG status. So I want to just start off with just explaining what the state enabling legislation says about why you all exist as a preservation commission. And this is it. It's not much. In fact, a lot of other states, if you talk to other state CLG coordinators, they'll quote, these big, long state statutes that say specifically how a commission can be formed and in what capacity and who has to be on the board and how many times you have to meet and all these things. This is it. The state says that a governing body can adopt zoning regulations that can include provisions that do these things. And one of them, number 3, is preserve structures and districts listed on local, state, and national register. There are other places in this same chapter that it mentions aesthetics. But, you can do design review for aesthetical reasons. But that's really the only thing that it says, because as a home rule state, it basically gives the power to the local governing bodies to set those up. What I always take from this, when I have done CLG training in the past, was, to me, this reads as you have the same authority and level of responsibility as the planning commission and the zoning, entity body. So not necessarily this would happen in Lawrence, but it's happened in other CLGs across the state, is that the Historic Preservation Commission meets in the back room of the library, and they just kind of sit around a table and they just kind of talk about historical stuff, and it's no, you should meet where the planning commission meets. If it's on the city council chambers, that's where you need to meet too. If the planning commission is televised, you guys should be televised too, because this is all the same authority that oversees them. So I just kind of wanted to start with that. And then talking about the certified local government program, there are some components of that overlap. If the certified local government program went away tomorrow, you all are still a preservation commission based on your local ordinance, that ordinance that you were just looking at. So even if the state preservation law went away tomorrow, you all still have design review under your local ordinance. You have to have a local ordinance and establish the Preservation Commission in order to become a certified local government. Being a certified local government doesn't create your local ordinance. So if the federal program went away, if the state program went away, you all would still have a local ordinance that establishes you as a commission and grants you all of those authorities and responsibilities that we were just looking at. So I think that's important also to look at and remember when you're doing design review that there are authorities and responsibilities granted to you by your ordinance and then also maybe by the state agreement that you have with us to do state law reviews. So I know Lynn sent this, I think you sent this out to everybody, right?
Mhm.
So you guys can look through these a lot later and maybe as part of the planning process, you want to talk about setting up specific times or certain meetings that you guys actually do training or look at some of these resources online. Because, I think the CLG requirement is that each commission member attends a training at least once a year. That can be a conference. It could be something that you guys apply for a scholarship to us to fund, to send you to a conference or bring in a speaker. The National Alliance of Preservation Commissions, NAPC, is an entity that they have like a speakers bureau or a trainers bureau that they can send people or even do it over Zoom. But nothing says that you couldn't also just do stuff in-house. There are tons of YouTube videos. There are tons of online training resources here. And so I thought I'd click on a couple of these and talk about a couple of things here. The National Park Service has this really cool online, I guess I would call it a training that you can work through. And you see these little tabs, A, B, C, D, E. This is all about working with, it says working in local historic districts, but what it really is preservation commissions. What is a preservation commission? What do you do? What can you do? What are some things that you need to keep in mind? And so this specific one under tab C, conducting a successful design review meeting, goes into what are 4 factors that influence the quality of a review process: clarity of the design guidelines, operating the style of the review committee, consistent review procedures, and documentation of decisions and rationale. And so, we just give a second here to kind of look at these and read through them. I think this could be something that would help guide decision-making, defensible decision-making. Having good design guidelines is helpful, I think, not only for you guys, but for property owners. Admittedly, the Secretary of the Interior standards are not specific. They're not meant to be. They're supposed to be vague and open to interpretation. They are not a law or a code. They are just simply a set of best practices that are open to that interpretation. So when they're applied or adopted by like the state preservation law or your local preservation ordinance to be applied for a design review, you all have to decide, okay, what law am I reviewing this under and what standard do I need to hold this, property, this proposal to? So with the state preservation law, it says in the statute that you are to determine if the project will damage or destroy the historic resource. So you're using the Secretary of the Interior standards to decide if this project will damage or destroy. And that's the exact language we're supposed to use. But the ordinance, what does it say? Does it just say approve or disapprove? Or does it say something? It's kind of based.
Well, for state law, it's that we use damage or destroy, but for the chapter 22, the local review, it's just approve or disapprove.
So you're using the Secretary of the Interior standards, but they're 2 separate laws. And there are two separate thresholds that you are making your decisions at. So you could theoretically approve one and disapprove the other.
When I'm thinking of an example.
Separately.
Yeah, and I'm thinking of a recent example of the Old Journal World building. And the state said it recommends not to paint brick, historic brick. And I think that was my criteria, my reason for not approving the certificate of approval, but everyone else said it's okay to paint it white. So,
Yeah.
So again, which is a good thing that there's several of us on the commission and we all use different criteria.
You
base our decisions on.
Yeah, you emphasize
whichever.
Yeah, we don't
criteria.
recommend painting unpainted brick, and I think we have to pull
And
the
that
standards to see which was standard.
Design review.
That was a downtown design review. We have a design guideline that says not to paint unpainted.
Yeah.
But an actual design.
Yeah.
So having design guidelines can really help because obviously the standards, there's just 10 standards and they're very broad. Having design guidelines that say, okay, downtown, here's what the character of downtown generally is. Here are things that are appropriate in downtown. Here are things that are not appropriate in downtown. And I always use the example of like a residential historic district. If you have a lot of white picket fences in a neighborhood, then that's the character of the neighborhood. And that seems like, okay, those are appropriate types of fences. And so a design guideline might say like white picket fences of, various materials and this different picket styles are fine, but a wrought iron metal fence that's 6 foot high or whatever is going to be not in the character of this historic district. Or, you can get as specific as color and materials. You may not want to, but you can. So that can be very helpful. And then it also is helpful to the property owners because they know what to expect. They're not going to come to you with something that's not going to be approved by the design guidelines if they know what those are. So if there are
That's why we have an ARC.
Yeah, if there are historic districts that don't have design guidelines, that's something that I would recommend to maybe putting in a plan.
Do y'all have national registered districts that have design guidelines, not locally ordinance districts, but just national registered districts?
So what usually happens, yes and no, because the National Register in and of itself does not have any requirements for design compliance, right?
Right.
Like you can just be listed on the National Register and it's not supposed to do anything. It doesn't impact your property at all as far as what you can and can't do. It is state and local laws attached to that listing that provide the protections. So Kansas is I'm going to call it special, not weird, special, that we have the state preservation law. There's only a couple other states that have similar laws and none of them go as deep as we do down to the permit level. Most of them only stay up at the state or city government level where it's like the actions by the actual government or the subdivision government. So listing on the National Register in any other state literally does nothing to protect or cause any kind of design review on your property. So yeah, at the national level, there's no design guidelines. There are guidelines to the standards that you can utilize. You guys might be familiar with, if I can get over here. The standards for rehabilitation. And then there are guidelines for rehabbing historic buildings. This is like the older version, but it goes through and has like do's and don'ts or recommended and not recommended treatments. So recommended treatments, not recommended treatments. And that's an older version. This is the online version. And it's broken up by like feature types. So you could look at windows and it breaks down recommended treatments, not recommended treatments. There are those design guidelines. And a lot of those are used by like state historic preservation offices, where people who are reviewing for tax credits. But you all can use them too to help interpret the standards. Design guidelines at the local level are meant, and they can be for locally listed districts. They can also be applied to state and national if you guys are reviewing those. But they're meant to be more specific to this particular neighborhood or this particular group of properties or property. I think Lawrence does a really good job, like when you guys list things to your local register, calling out what are the character defining features that are supposed to be preserved. And you identify that 250-foot, what do you call it? Context area. So that it's very clear that these are the aspects of that context area. These are the characteristics of that we are looking to preserve.
And then we have people who come in and say, well, you're saying our context, our idea doesn't fit with the context. And then they walk 4 blocks and 2 blocks and they show us all the ones that are breaking and doing what they want to do. And, so yeah, it's still busy, but that's what we're for. I mean, that's what we're discussing is all those.
Yeah, there kind of has to be, there has to be lines at some point. So
Yeah.
that's, understandable.
When that happens.
Yeah, there was something in Topeka recently where we were talking about fences, and the city asked me if I thought this was appropriate. And I just got on Google and I went like catty corner and then, or like a little ways up. And I was like, well, there's a fence just like it right there.
Yeah, right.
I don't know if it like complied with, whatever their review process was. I was like, well, but if you want to see what it looks like, it looks just like that one. It was kind of funny.
Yeah.
So yeah, remember that the purpose of the meeting is to make a decision. So obviously you want to keep that objective paramount. Focus on the big issues, not on personal bias or petty details. You guys just talked about ethics and all that. Remember that the ordinance and guidelines were adopted to represent a consensus. So yeah, you're not going to please everybody. It's a consensus, and things do change. So,
solar panels.
Yeah, I mean, new things are going to come on and we're going to have to tackle those.
Yeah.
And then also, what the consensus was 20 years ago might have changed. And so we have to update ordinances, guidelines, things to address that. You guys might have already seen this, but we're getting a big push in lots of different ways for alternative materials. So that's going to have to be addressed. So listen to the applicant and his representatives, ask for clarity if you need. Not you guys, but back when I was reviewing minutes and things or agendas from other CLGs, I was always perplexed because the packet would go out and I would see the packet and I'd be like, there's no photos in this packet. There's no plans. There's just a description of work and then a recommendation from the staff person. I'm like, how are the commissioners supposed to make a decision? You don't have enough information. So, obviously if you don't think you have enough information, be asking for that. Is it complete? Critique the proposal following the design criteria and guidelines. Use a checklist that goes somewhere. So that's interesting. And the discussion seems to be over. Ask these questions of yourself. Have the criteria and guidelines been sufficiently met? You have 2 choices, yes or no. Which criteria and guidelines give you the basis for making this decision? So yeah, I mean, approvals, mostly disapprovals, but approvals too should be based on a specific standard or specific design criteria. That way they're defensible, because like we were talking about earlier when Randy was here, I move that we approve this project. Okay, second, vote. Okay, it passed. What did we just do? Why do we? Because also when it comes later, not that there's not supposed to be precedence a lot of times in historic design review because every case is different and each property is different. But you are going to get feedback like that like, why did my neighbor get to do this and I don't? And so if there's a good reason that case was specific to that property and there was a certain situation or circumstance that made standard number 4 really critical over on here, this one, and it's not on this one, it would be a good thing to say that in the motion or during the discussion so that we can go back and be like, well, that was a different circumstance. So Once you voted, summarize the outcome clearly. And this, a lot of that has to do, that falls on staff to do the sending out of the approvals or the denials and process those. But this is a resource that I thought was handy that you guys might want to look at more in depth as if you're planning to do things in the future and planning out strategies for how you want to move forward, then setting aside some time to look at online resources like this and just go through and talk about them might be a good idea. Problems facing local preservation commissions. Guys just updated your preservation ordinance, so that shouldn't be a problem. Lack of staff. I mean, that's always, we would always love to have more people to help. Inadequate budget. Okay, more money would be great. Lack of support from a city or county. That happens sometimes. Political things ebb and flow. Failure of the commission to understand local preservation ordinance they administer. Well, that's why you guys are here today, to make sure everybody's on the same page and we've read through everything and don't have questions. So, and then, hey, there's some solutions down here too. So, okay. And then I think I had one more that I thought might pertain to you guys. Local government historic preservation activities. These are like Q&As. But this relates back to what I think we're going to talk about with the planning too. Some of the things that preservation commissions can do. It's interesting. We just were at the State Preservation Conference. Megan Brown, who is the chief of the division at the National Park Service that oversees the CLG program. We asked her to do a presentation on what are the benefits of being a CLG or becoming a CLG. And she emphasized very much that it is meant to be, along with the National Register, primarily a planning tool. Along with the Planning Commission, this is a planning body that specifically is about the preservation of historic resources. Being a CLG does not require you to do design review. In our opinion, we think it's the best way to protect historic resources, but you don't have to do design review to be a CLG. And so the CLGs that don't do design review, what do? And a lot of them do survey, outreach, education, these other kinds of things. They do design guidelines to help people, encourage people to do good design work, but they don't necessarily regulate it. Those are things that you guys can do. I know obviously a lot of your time gets taken up with design review. Okay. And so then I wanted to highlight a couple of things from NAPC. National Alliance of Preservation Commissions is a national organization specifically for you all. A lot of their webinars are free, especially if you are an NAPC member. And the city, as a member, passes that on to the preservation commissioners and the staff. So are you guys a member?
We just joined, so we'll be passing that on.
Okay. And so for future reference, Gwen and I haven't had a chance to really talk about this yet, but I had a conversation with NAPC before Gwen joined our staff. And I think we're going to be moving toward a model where we, the SHPO, just pay NAPC and all of our CLGs become members.
Okay, that would be awesome because I have the job.
Right. So we're going to figure that. We'll make that a plan to work on in the next year or so. But as a member and as the preservation, I think, I think what happens is Lynn just gives NAPC a list of your all's names and email addresses. That way, when you sign up for a webinar, they can just match it up and say, oh, yep, they're a member. You get access to a lot of the webinars and things that they do. But they have things like this one, if I can get it to come up. This was a webinar they did, and it says it's $15. Again, I think when you register, if you say you're a member, it comes up as $0. But this was a webinar they did about best practices for effective local preservation commissions. And they talk about all of these things. They always have really good speakers and do a really good job. You might be familiar with NAPC because they do every other year a forum. It's a conference, but they call it the forum. And this year it's in West Palm Beach, Florida, which is not bad. We always have scholarship money to send you all. They have lots of online resources. They also have things like, this is another webinar, hidden tool for the decision-making process, the staff and commissioner support system. They did like a little podcast to kind of explain, how they make that decision-making process easier for folks. They have all of these resources on their website, including design guidelines. These are just examples from other cities that you can look at. They also have preservation plans that you can look at as examples if that was something like you were redoing your preservation plan or something. Messaging guide for local preservation programs. This is examples of things to help you get your message out to the community and property owners. And then under here is just a plethora of information. So I could not find this on their website. It was one of the very first things that was given to me as a, hey, you need to read this. But it's way down here. Letter to George, how to keep the Preservation Commission out of court and avoid being sued. And it's a little long. It's like 24 pages. It's also very funny. It is written in the style of someone is writing a letter to George. And there's a little preface here. But he's basically giving George a heads up like, hey, I hear you got nominated to this commission. Here's some things you need to know. It's funny, but it also has a lot of truth in there about like how to avoid getting yourself in hot water. So that is on there. Laws and the preservation commissions. This is a publication that is probably a little dated, but I think there's some good information in here. Commission authorities and what it does. That mean, the only thing I would say with all of these materials from NAPC is just keep in mind that Kansas is special. So if you think about, like, if you've traveled across the country and you've visited all these lovely places like New Orleans and Savannah and Santa Fe and places like that, where you have very vibrant, preserved historic districts, that all happens because of a historic preservation commission. That does not happen because of the SHPO or the Park Service. They do that at the local level. They don't have state laws that require that. There is nothing at the national level that requires that. That is them at the local level saying, we're going to have design guidelines, we are going to have design review, and we are going to require this historic district to, comply with that. So I don't think a lot of people understand that. I think if they go to some place like Savannah or the French Quarter or something, they think that that's because the Park Service did that.
But what do you mean by Kansas being special?
So we have the state preservation law.
Okay, so you're
Yeah.
saying we are among
We're the
the
only-
minority of states?
Right. So what that has done is back in the 1980s. Stop sharing?
Yeah, if you're done with your.
Okay, yes, thank you. We might go back to that in a second. What that does is when that law was enacted back in the 80s, it was great. I think there's a lot of good things about the state preservation law. But what it did was it made people kind of think that the state was in charge of preservation and that the state protected your historic resources. And then we have agreements with most of the CLGs to do those reviews at the local level, but you're still doing those reviews under state authority. So it took a lot of the power, in my opinion, away from you all. And so when I started being the CLG coordinator for the state, I wanted to go out and remind the CLGs when I was doing training that like, you guys have the power. The state preservation law is a tool that can be implemented and it kind of adds to your power. But again, if the state preservation law went away tomorrow, you still have an ordinance. You still have the Preservation Commission. You still have your design review, your design guidelines. And that's what every other state has. Okay, so Savannah, New Orleans, Santa Fe, all the New York City,
Boston.
Boston,
geez,
all
they're
those
drowning in it.
places, all those places, they are preserved because of a landmarks preservation commission. Some of those are at the historic district level. Some of those are at the city or at the county level, but it's not the state that's requiring that. It's not the National Park Service that's requiring that.
One of the
It's
things
preservation.
that we can talk about in the planning too is that I have talked to Old West Lawrence over the years about they are not a locally designated National Register designated historic district. They're a National Register historic district. So projects over there get reviewed under state preservation law. But if that state preservation law goes away, there is no protection in Old West Lawrence. So the only locally designated districts we have is we have a block in Oread and the Johnson Block Historic District. Those are the only two locally designated historic districts we have. We have conservation overlay districts, downtown, Oread, 8th and Penn. But as far as Chapter 22, Lawrence Register of Historic Places, designated historic districts, we just have those two.
Okay, now I'm totally confused because what's the difference between a district and an overlay?
Okay, there's the Lawrence Register of Historic Places is a historic district.
Right?
That would be like the Johnson Block.
I don't even know what the Johnson block is, but go ahead.
Okay, it's the 800 block between Arkansas and Missouri. It's also on the National Register of Historic Places, but it is a locally designated historic district. And those are under Chapter 22 of the City Code for the Lawrence Register of Historic Places. We also have urban conservation overlay districts, which are under Chapter 20 in the Land Development Code. And those are the ones that have the design guidelines associated with them. So you review those projects as well. So you really have three authority giving places for you. You have Chapter 22, which is the Lawrence Register of Historic Places and Certificate of Approval. You have state law review for National Register properties. And then you have the Land Development Code, which is Chapter 20, which is your urban conservation overlay districts with their design guidelines.
So yeah, that's a critical point that I've tried to make to the CLGs too, is that what's happened is the state law has encouraged people to list things on the state and the National Register. Then of course, our tax credit program is one of the best in the nation. That's encouraged people to list things on the state and the National Register. The enticement and the incentive to list things on the local register is problematic sometimes, because as a city, if you have a budget to offer like grants or tax abatements or something like that to encourage people to do local listing, they haven't been doing it. And so we have, how many CLGs now? 18, 17, 18. But almost all of them, if I went to Leavenworth or if I went to Dodge City and I say, what's listed on your local register? They'd be like, nothing or very little. So that's a problem, because if the state law goes away, I mean, it could. In 2013, it was amended very quickly without a lot of discussion. Then yeah, there's no protection for your local resources other than what's listed on your local landmark list, because that's the only thing that you guys have jurisdiction over. So, yeah.
What is the historical, why is Kansas special?
That's what I'm trying to, I know, that's what I'm trying to wrap around.
No, I understand.
Yeah,
No, I mean the backstory, not how is it special?
I mean, I wasn't around in the eighties. I don't know for sure, but the story is, I think there were some demolitions like in the middle of the night kind of things, like a town lost their historic depot.
We had that here.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what
Yeah.
started the Lawrence
Yeah.
Association of Neighborhoods.
I think there were a couple of those that were sort of in quick succession, and the preservation program, like preservation as a thing was growing and starting to become like, there was a program at K-State, there were like people that were involved. So all of a sudden it just became a thing of like, how do we keep this from happening?
Right.
We know that's a private property or it's owned by the railroad or whatever, but they had to get a permit and like nobody knew, or it happened in the middle of the night and the permit,
We lost our prairie that way.
yeah, it was like $300 for not getting a
Hold
permit.
it.
So like, how can we hold these people accountable? And so they passed this law that says, well, if the government, it's based off of the federal preservation law to some extent. It's like if the government is going to undertake or fund a project, and then we take it a step further, permit a project on a historic property, then we need to go through this process to make sure it's more open to the public, and there's somebody with a professional level of experience that's going to give an opinion on it before they just do it. But it's not perfect. You guys know how that works. Even if you do say something is a damage or destroy, it can be appealed to the governing body and how supportive the governing body is. And they do also have a different criteria that they can look at.
Well, which brings up the whole conundrum that we talk about a lot. It's demolition by neglect. So after who knows who has allowed it to be neglected to the point where it has to be demolished, we have no recourse. There's no way of punishing the person who allowed it to deteriorate over 10, 20, 15, whatever years it was,
Yeah.
It just happens. And that's, for me, one of my biggest concern, one of my biggest personal concerns is incredible buildings that get demolished because somebody let it go to rot.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, that's unfortunately, we've talked to people about that before too, because the federal preservation law, the state preservation law, and I think your guys' is local, most of them do. It's all triggered by an action. And there's nothing to regulate inaction.
Yeah.
So unless you have like minimum maintenance codes or
We
something
do,
like
our
that to, like-
preservation ordinance actually has a minimum maintenance standard. We adopted the city also has, we use, okay, don't let me get this wrong. It's, what's our minimum maintenance code? It's the, is it an IPC code?
I think so. It's part of, yeah.
It's part of the I code,
Yeah.
that's right, yeah.
But a lot of it has to do with like the exterior, the foundation's falling apart where you can see it from the outside if you're going to walk the neighborhood and look at every foundation and see. But otherwise, you can't see the interior. I mean, we don't do interior inspections unless it's the rental housing code that we now have, So you have no idea what's falling apart indoors, how many, walls are falling down and holes and.
Seen it implemented in Kansas, but I think I've heard about it as programs implemented in other states at the local level where they try to get ahead of, if there's a hole in the roof, it's leaking.
Yeah.
Can the city patch it? Put a lien on the property? I don't, do something
Right.
so that we don't have to demolish it later, because a couple $1,000 now would save us
Mhm.
thousands of dollars later having to demolish it, and we're losing
Right.
historic research, and it takes funding and
Exactly.
it takes, so even minimum maintenance codes, you have to have enforcement. And so if the city doesn't have staff,
Exactly. Yeah.
they have thousands
Right.
and thousands of miles of streets
It's all,
to, try to look at. So, yeah, it's imperfect. But, yeah, that's my understanding about why though.
Thank you.
At one point we added the environs clause because similar things, people were worried about what was happening in the environs. And then in 2013, it was a legislator who was like, well, don't tell me what to do with my property kind of thing.
oh, yeah.
Got it taken right off.
Right. Yeah.
So that's a worry. I want you guys to make
Mhm.
sure that you're getting, but it does, it does take public education and support to list things on the local register. Because it does have more sticks than carrots. So if you're going to try to convince somebody to like say, okay, we want you to list your property to the local register so that you can be subject to this design review, but there's no tax incentive, grant, property tax abatement, anything to like offset that.
People are protesting.
Yeah.
When we have one.
Yeah.
Like the
We have-
church.
Oh, the church one, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, but
Or
that's,
University Place, was that local? Or-
it was University Place.
Well,
Yeah,
that was for a grant for the to write a national register nomination.
right. I mean, it's,
So Katrina, are there other communities in Kansas that have financial incentives at the local level? I mean, because we have none. I mean, we have.
No, but I mean, I've had this conversation with them before, like, how do we get people to put things on the local register? And I'm like, I don't know, because I mean, you think about it as you yourself as a property owner, why would you put more restrictions on yourself? Unless you I think a lot of times people do it because they do want to be a good steward of the property and
right. I
they
mean,
do
yeah,
have preservation.
Because there's some people who purposely buy a historic home because they love it
Right.
and they want to become that protector, that,
Right.
you know.
So I'm gonna list it on the register so that it
Right.
does have some protection.
Right.
But if you're just trying to convince.
Which is why I wanted Stevens Fox to be the criteria 2 or whatever it was. There's the 3 criteria: architectural, and then it can be a significant person, and then I forgot the third one. 3. Anyway,
Oh.
that's why I was arguing. I mean, she was going, I think that the way it was written for the Lawrence landmark was for architecture. But I was arguing, in addition, going for the significance of a person.
Yeah, significance, and Katrina can talk to this a little bit too. It's kind of creeping into the whole National Register area.
Right.
Significance for a person, it's hard because it has to be more than he was mayor of Lawrence. Because we've had how many mayors of Lawrence, So it's when you're doing criteria for significance for a person, they really have to have achieved something significant.
Right.
Impact.
Yeah, and the guy I'm talking about was a railroad worker. No big deal, right? But this is what I mean by if the national has this high, well, let me call it a high standard of criteria for a significant person, President of the United States and Mount Vernon and, whatever. Then that's looking at it from my perspective through a white lens of privilege, of moneyed property. And so what about, Charles Langston? Okay. Charles Langston, right? Oh, jeepers. Well, okay, so let me put it to you this way. So
I have to leave. I have to leave.
All right.
So,
Thanks, Bill. I appreciate you coming.
thanks, everybody.
Well, I mean,
major
maybe
civil rights.
I'm not good with names.
Yeah. Major civil rights advocate.
Okay, right, yeah.
And I just remember a group of people, Black folks came, on a bus tour, and there's a concrete marker on the ground that says this was the site of, okay? And people were distraught when they found out the original house was gone, but thank God for the little marker that said, this is where it used to be, okay?
Yeah.
Because they all knew the name Charles Langston. Oh, my God.
Sure,
I mean,
yeah,
he's just
okay.
common ordinary.
Well, I mean, a couple of things I want to address. The National Register does list things at the national level of significance, George Washington, whatever. You can also list things on the National Register at the state or local level of significance. So someone who was a civil rights leader just in Lawrence, only did things in the city of Lawrence, could be listed on the National Register, like his house or whatever, his place of business, at the local level of significance, because he did things significant in the city of Lawrence. What Lynn is saying, though, is that he can't just be the mayor, he has to have done something. So if he was the mayor and also, was the first person who led this big development or whatever in the city, or really changed the way the city, the city layout happened or something like that, then that would be significant. It also, for criterion B, it has to be that property has to have integrity of features and design and materials from that period. So if he did something in the 19-teens, but then he lived in this house in the 1950s after he retired, yes, it was his house, but wasn't his house when he was doing his important thing. Does that make sense? So he retired there in the 1950s and he.
Yeah, I'm just
there
thinking of multiple examples.
Right.
You're describing.
And I mean,
Yes.
I'm not saying that there couldn't be like some significance to the 1950s house, because like Alf Landon's house in Topeka, is not where he lived when he was running for president.
Right,
It's where
okay.
he lived later. But I would look at that nomination and it might be listed for architecture, not for Alf Landon. Because it's not where he lived when he did his most significant things. It's just easier to list things for criterion C because of architecture, because you can see it. Whereas for people, that's definitely part of the story. It should definitely be included in the nomination. It's just harder because it has to meet all those things for the National Register. Now, the local register, you guys may have different criteria, or they could be a little bit looser, but.
Okay.
It's similar. though.
Yeah. But
Yeah, I mean, I get that, but
I mean, the idea is that like, yes, you should definitely be able to list things to the local, state and national register. Not through the, the filter of the white lens. Like we should definitely be focusing on underrepresented communities, underrepresented property types. But they still have to have some significance, and so there has to
Social
be.
impact is hard to.
It's hard
Yeah,
to
that's
do
a tough
that,
one, yeah.
but like they're also, I mean, it could be a very plain little worker house, whatever. But if that's a really good example, then it might still be criterion C because that's the example of that property.
Well, that's what we're
style.
that's what we're trying to do for some NAACP co-founders in 1921 with their homes.
Right.
They lived there during
Right.
when they did that.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah. Other points we needed to hit on?
Would you explain just a little bit about what a certified is?
Yeah. So I mentioned before,
Because I think I throw that out a lot of that
Mhm.
we're CLG and it, I mean,
and it
it's
gets
kind of a big deal.
confused because it gets confused with like who you all are as the Preservation Commission versus the G in the CLG acronym.
Which is how we got to stay an independent board or commission recently.
Well,
Because we're,
no, that's we're a CLG, but because we did, well, that was a factor, but it was mainly because we do those state law reviews and we
Right.
have to have expertise
okay.
on the commission.
So CLG, the woman who came from the National Park Service, she always admits that it's the most, just unexciting acronym in the world. But if you break it down, it's certified local government. So first of all, you have to have a local government, city, county, parish, village, whatever, depending on where you're located at. That local government has to adopt some sort of ordinance or whatever they call it at the local level. And it has to do a couple of basic things. You have to have a preservation commission. And there are some basic requirements of how many people are on the commission and what the makeup of the commission is. So I think it's 40% has to be, your background or your expertise has to be in the preservation related fields. But even that is very loose because in some communities, obviously it would be hard to do that if it's a very small community. So you have to at least try to have 40%, but it's flexible. You have to have a local register of historic places, whatever you call that, your local landmark register, however you want to title it. You do not have to do design review, but you are supposed to do survey. And that's really because it's really hard to preserve things if you don't know where they are. And so having an inventory of historic places is important. And so you have to do survey. And then it says you have to comply with any other like state preservation laws or anything that, like the federal preservation law, this section 106. So you have a local government, they have an ordinance that set up this board you have a local register of historic places, and you have said, okay, we're going to do survey. So you send all that material to me at the SHPO or to Gwen now. We look at it and say, yes, it meets the criteria. We send it to the National Park Service. They say, yes, it meets the criteria, and they certify you. And that's all it is. But as a certified local government, you are considered to be partners in the state, local, state, federal preservation partnership. So you guys are on the ground level, you know, you're doing the grassroots stuff at the local level. You're the closest to the historic resources. The state, most of our responsibility is to pass through technical expertise and money. And then the federal government is, you know, they establish the Secretary of the Interior standards, and they give us the money. Do you guys know where the Historic Preservation Fund money comes from?
I forgot.
Okay. So it comes from mitigation of offshore drilling.
Oh, my heavens to beds.
I did not know
In
that.
Kansas?
The entire United States and all of the territories.
Jeez.
So what funds the CLG program, as well as the National Register, the tax credit programs, everything having to do with the National Preservation Act, is the Historic Preservation Fund. And the Historic Preservation Fund comes from offshore mineral deposit.
Historic, or in totality?
In totality. That fund, those mitigation funds also go to other things like conservation funds and other things, but we get several $1 million set aside every year by Congress, and that's to fund all of the preservation programs. And it's mitigation for the impact on the environment. So
Well, we drill for oil offshore, right?
Right. And so to mitigate that, this is where the money comes from.
It's like carbon offsets.
Yeah. So it's always funny. It's always funny when someone says like, my tax dollars pay your salary.
Yeah, right.
But your SUV does.
You know, that's just crazy.
So what happens is the National Park Service gets a big chunk of that. They use some of that for their own reprogramming. They pass through an allocation to the state historic preservation offices, the tribal preservation offices, and the territorial preservation offices. And so we use that money to pay our staff and run our programs at the state level. And then we're required to pass through 10% of that to the CLGs every year. So we just had the meeting this morning for the pass-through grants. We only had 2 CLGs apply, Lawrence and Topeka. And so you all only asked for $36,000, and I have $100,000 to give away.
We'll take it. We have surveys coming up.
Yeah, and so that's what I wanted to, as we move into the planning.
No kidding.
Everything you do, pretty much, unless it's specific to just like we can't fund local historic district nominations, but National Register of Historic Districts we can fund, survey we can fund, educational programming. I mean, we'll talk about all this, what you guys want to do, but pretty much all of that is eligible for HPF funding. And we have to have a competitive grant every year because we do offer that money to more than just the CLGs. The other 7 applicants that applied were not CLGs, and they'll get funding too. But we have about $1 million every year that comes to us. We pay our staff and our salaries, and then the rest of it we have to spend, or otherwise we lose it. So we want to give the money away to y'all.
We'll help.
Right.
Is there
Well, but
developers?
there's a caveat here. It's a grant program, and it requires a 40% match.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
Right.
And that's where the problem is always coming.
Got it.
The city of Lawrence.
Right.
Is
We're doing some things to help with that though. So
okay, we're all interested.
yes. So to help with that, because we've seen less and less CLGs apply for the money, and we still have to give away 10%. And plus we have more than that to give away if y'all needed it. So we have started, to Gwen's chagrin, because I'm like, hi Gwen, here's a bunch of stuff to do. We have started that if a CLG asks us for money outside of the competitive grant round, And we can give it to you if the project meets, the criteria for funding and we have the money to give you, we'll give it to you. Just ask.
Huh.
So you don't have to wait for the competitive grant round. So if you guys want to go to a conference or you have a special project that comes up in the middle of the year, and hopefully that'll also help with like every CLG has a different funding cycle. So when you have to ask your city council for money happens at a different time. So if it doesn't line up with our grant round, don't worry about it. The other thing that we have been doing for a little while is that it is a 40% match. The matches can be in kind. So it used to be that a lot of staff time would be used for match, but that's become harder to come by too, because Lynn has to do 4 different things, not just preservation, and other CLGs too.
Well, you can still count those hours as in kind.
Count it, but sometimes
Right,
you
I
gotta
just
have-
don't have like for the
40%.
University Place grant, for example. Used to, we would make our 40% match with my salary doing in-kind work. Like I would help with some of the field work and I would help review the drafts and I would help with the public meetings and I would, in addition to administering the grant. We don't have that staff time right now. We don't have that capacity. So we couldn't meet that 40% match. So we submitted a grant and asked for a waiver of that 40% match because we don't have the staff capacity right now to make that 40% match. We just don't have.
You go ahead.
Can hours count that are community-based surveyors? People who volunteers who live in the community and might want their property surveyed.
So other in-kind counts, your all's time. If you just talk about the grant at your preservation commission, your all's time counts as match. But what the critical point that I was going to bring up was what Lynn said. So CLGs, because you're our special partners, we can offer you a waiver of the match. Because we at the state have match from our state grant program, and that gives us enough money that we can match all of the grants. So we want you guys to have buy-in and we want the city to have a little bit of, a little bit of skin in the game. But if you can't make 40%, that's fine. Just ask for a waiver.
Just out of curiosity, because I like getting sense, how is that time match? Let's say we talk about, the commission talks about something for an hour. Can we declare ourselves, each of us, is it a billable rate?
Times 7.
That is a very good point.
And that's what I'm going.
Okay, so we have an answer. It's fine. So if you are doing minimum wage labor, you get counted at the federal minimum wage. If you're stuffing envelopes for public meeting or
So it
something.
depends on what you're doing.
So if you've got a teenager who's gonna do some volunteer work for you and you have them stuff envelopes, it's minimum wage. If you all are, experienced preservation commission members, what the Park Service has recommended is that we use this, there's a website, an organization called Independent Sector. And they go around and they figure the rate of what like volunteer labor costs. And so like right now in Kansas or like last year in Kansas, it's like $20 some an hour. I forget what it was, $23, $24 an hour is what they figure is like the average volunteer, the value of volunteer time, right? Third level, but the third level is if you're an architect and you're doing architect level pro bono services for this project, then you get to count your time at that level, what you would bill, like billable hours. So it just depends on what you're doing. If you're just talking about the project, it's going to be $20 some an hour.
Right.
If you're actually going to sit down with the consultant and go over plans and use your architecture expertise or your historian expertise to help with a project, then you get to count it at like whatever your salary is.
Well, so that's following up my question. So, because again, I'm happy to do historical work, writing, research, what have you, studying in the hours, but, and again, if I'm not conflicting as a historic resource commissioner, but because I'm retired, what's my salary? What would be my volunteer
I would do.
time? Do you know what I mean? My salary time.
Or like whatever would be like the last time you got paid for those services, or what you would ask to be paid for those services.
Oh, well, if I could ask for what I would be paid, it would, and then I could,
I mean,
I
what
could
is-
get rid of my gender discrimination.
Yeah, and that's, that's the,
Seriously.
well, I mean, and
And I
it's a
could get
matter,
rid of salary compression
Yeah.
too. That would be, I'd really double whammy it.
it's just a matter of like, you have to document it. So like if we get audited
Right.
and they're like,
Yeah, so
why did you
that's-
found her at
but that's what I
$100
mean.
an hour?
Well, but that's what I'm asking is like, I don't even know what I'm worth. You see what I'm
Yeah.
saying? And, but whatever I could be worth.
Would I pay my historians at my company because we
Mhm.
employ historians?
Mhm.
Okay.
Like a
That's, I mean, that
rate.
seems.
There is a going rate. I said it, I'm oblivious to all this. So
Like that would be reasonable. Like I would,
Right.
you know, you would reach out to other companies or entities, other preservation consultants and be like, what do you charge per hour for this kind of thing? So,
But Katrina,
But-
right now, there's not a lot of competition for those grants. So like when we ask for a waiver, that's okay. But as they become more competitive,
Yeah.
won't it be harder? Won't the grant review committee look harder at that 40% match and whether or
Right.
not there's any
Mhm.
cash?
Right, it would
from the
become-
city?
like the Park Service has a couple of grants where they don't require a match they always point out, but if you have match to offer, that becomes part of the competitiveness of your application. So, yeah, I mean, in the future, it could change. So the third way that we could make some projects is something that is just starting to kind of take off. Oops. Clicked on something and now I can't click it down.
Oh, wait.
that happens on my computer all the time.
Okay,
I think
thank
it's
you.
a-
Go away, go away. Okay. Okay. The third way to do it is because CLGs are our special partners, they get priority consideration for our grant programs. Y'all can ask for that money at any time, but knowing that the city has limited resources, staffing, et cetera, is you can do a third-party designee. So we can give grant money to local governments, nonprofits, or universities. Those are like the three entities that we can fund. So if the city of Lawrence, let's say, wanted to, this particular project is really important, the city definitely wants to see it done. We simply do not have the resources to do it. We don't even have the resources necessarily to go out to bid and hire a contractor. But we want to see it done. There over here is a nonprofit, Lawrence Preservation Alliance, Main Street, Local Historical Society, the Watkins Museum, like whatever it is that's a nonprofit. They're willing to do the grant administration, do all of the, you know, things that you have to do to run a grant. The city can apply for the money from us and say, we want this project to happen, but we are designating this other third party as our grant administrator, and then everything works through that grant administrator. They do all the administration, they do the bidding, they do the payout because these grants are reimbursement. So that can be it's easier for a city to do that than a nonprofit. But if a nonprofit is willing to take on the work, then that's a way for them to do that. So if like Lawrence Preservation Alliance came to the city and said, we're willing to do the survey, we're willing to do this educational programming. I know, Lynn, you probably don't have time to take it on, but if you can ask the SHPO for us for some money, then we'll do it for you. That's also.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Topeka has one that's just getting started right now. They have an African-American resources multiple property document that they did a while ago, identified all these sites, they have a context. And now there is a nonprofit organization in town that says, well, we want to put together a map to get people aware of these places so that they can do like tours and walk around. the
Right.
neighborhood and things. But the city said, sounds great. We don't have time to do that. We don't have the resources to do that or even apply for a grant to do that. So the nonprofit wrote the grant application. The city of Topeka I think they ended up doing like a memorandum of understanding. But, you know, some sort of
Yeah.
letter or instrument that says, we support this. Will you please give them money in our name, basically? So that is the third way that we can do it.
Which could be the city asking the Oak Hill Cemetery Committee for the bucks to clean and preserve and restore stones at Oak Hill.
So that brings up a good point. Can you use HPF money for physical preservation now, or is it all still plain?
So it can be used for HPF, but because of, the amount of funding we have, we prefer to use the HPF money for educational and like more of the like paper products. kind of
HPF is what?
Historic Preservation Fund, this federal
Oh.
money that we're talking about.
Okay.
It can be used for physical work on National Register listed property. What I would say to that is involve some sort of training or educational component. So for example, a couple of years ago at one of our state historic sites, we have this little building in Council Grove. Have you ever guys been to the Commission State Historic Site? So there's the big house, and then there's a little small it's a reconstruction of a claw. It's called like an Indian agent house.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
was, like,
yeah.
provided to
The Rock just went there.
and so anyway, this little rock structure has a wood roof on it. And the roof was in bad shape, and we were trying to figure out like how we could use federal money for it, but like, can we do something else to like use this as an opportunity to educate the public or something?
Mm-hmm.
And so we hired the contractors to replace the roof, but as part of the contract, we said, you have to put on a roof repair workshop. And then we also hired videographers to come and do a little video about how to repair a wood shingle roof or replace a wood shingle roof. So the roof got replaced, yes, but we also had a workshop for not very many people came, but we also have a video now that is available to the public, and anybody who's interested can. So we did that several years ago with the cemetery. They had the cemetery repair workshop.
We just had another one Will just recorded one on how to conserve.
Yeah.
With the company that was doing the
Yeah.
conservation.
So those kind of things would probably be better received if it had like an educational component.
Okay.
Or something that lasts longer than just the one day or whatever.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that why we did the lesson plans for the?
We actually did those because the state historic preservation officer at the time had interest in doing lesson plans.
Because those are wonderful. They're nice.
They are.
We're getting ready to do.
People would use them.
Yeah, I know. They're hard to get. That's part of it.
They're online.
I know. They're hard to figure out how to get to.
Find them.
That took me a long time. We're getting ready to do that for the Kansas Suffragist Memorial. Educational something,
Okay.
But that's not preservation, I guess.
Yeah, it has to be related to the National Register.
We're creating a mural that we want preserved for the next 1,000 years.
Yeah, I've had phone calls before, like, there's this great, event that we have every summer, and it's been going on for 100 years.
Yeah.
Can we get money to, host it next year? And I'm like, no.
Yeah, right.
sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not what we do. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you want to segue in, since we've kind of started planning anyway, and talk about the state plans.
Yeah, so, let me go back to your, how do we do that? Gotta do that. Share screen. Is it this screen?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So, down there by Gwen, if you guys want, there are copies of our previous state preservation plan. And then I attached our draft new plan. So it has been in the past every 5 years, but we're going to stretch it out in the future to maybe 7 or 9 years, just because it's a lot of work. The SHPO, because as part of our responsibility for getting our federal funding, we are supposed to put out a state preservation plan. And it's meant to be not the plan for the SHPO, it's meant to be the plan for the entire state, which is hard to do because we don't do all of the preservation for the whole state. You guys do a lot of it, and then other entities do as well. But I will say at the back, towards the back, there are goals and objectives. And we have to tie all of our funding to those. So if we pass through a grant with CLG, when we enter it on the National Park Service database, we have to tie it to which goal and objective this relates to. And so most of the ones in the new plan are very similar to the ones that you'll see in your hand. And then the person we had draft this for us came up with the idea of also including, what does she call those? Like opportunities. Challenges and opportunities. So challenges for preservation partners to increase preservation awareness across Kansas. So she has some other ones, partnering with allies, preparing to increase for reviews, which we're seeing, exploring additional funding, reevaluating how we use HPF money, National Register Program tax credits. So she's looking at different challenges and opportunities that we hope we can implement. So I thought this would kind of give you guys maybe something to refer to. And I didn't know what kind of format you thought like would work best. Like you're looking for more of like an action plan, right?
Yeah, but what, can you just briefly tell us what the state's major goals and objectives are for preservation? Or, are you looking for updating old surveys? Or are you looking for underrepresented communities?
Yes, all that. So if you look at the goals and objectives that are in that or on the screen, this is the newer ones, but I think, like I said, they're pretty similar. Education is huge because I think that there's myths and misconceptions about what preservation is and what it can and can't do. And then we have, all these programs that people don't know about. Underrepresented communities is huge because obviously, yes, the National Register has been around since the 60s. We've been doing all these, nominations. We have, I want to say like over 1,500, maybe close to 1,600 properties listed in the state on the National Register. But the percentage of those that represent, LGBTQ plus, tribal properties, different ethnic groups is going to be very small. And then there's even like, I've talked to the National Register person at the conference, trying to think outside of the box because she said, obviously, yes, there is the thought that like these particular kinds of examples are underrepresented, but also thinks that outside of the box, it's just like what's not represented in your community or in your state. And so, for example, in Kansas, there are counties in the southwest corner of the state we have no listings in and very little survey information. So like we as the state need to go there and reach out to those people. We need to go do the survey. We need to reach out to them to get listings. And so it's not necessarily a group or property type. It's just a geographic location. So that could also be true in your community. You've got downtown, you've got your old neighborhoods that are sort of clustered around downtown and the university. But what about other areas of the city?
There's been talk of, Jan Schubert, Eric did a lot in terms of Douglas County and trying to work on a barn project, right? Because there's a whole bunch of barns out in the county.
Yeah.
And houses and whatnot.
They've been, very successful in doing that too. So, but 50 years ago is 1974 now, guys. So are there 60s and 70s and 80s neighborhoods that you should be looking at as examples of what
lots,
good representation? This area's had too many changes and modifications, that kind of thing, because so So underrepresented, just think about that in terms of like broader perspective too. Yes, it could be an ethnic group, it could be, you know, a certain like, you know, railroad workers, that kind of thing, but it could also be property types or areas of the community. Survey, tons of survey. We hit on survey for a couple of reasons. I mean, obviously, like I said, you can't preserve it if you don't know where it is. But also think of it in terms of just like planning tools. If heaven forbid there's some sort of natural disaster, FEMA comes in, they are a federal agency. They're supposed to comply with federal preservation law. One of the first things they're going to ask the city is, where are all your important cultural resources? We want to make sure we don't tear something down by accident. We want to make sure we have to comply with federal law. Do you have an inventory of where all the cultural resources are? So if you have those surveys, you just hand it over and you say, avoid these areas, focus on this area, you know, watch out for this property type. It makes things go faster. They can start spending their FEMA money and they can start getting things cleared out. But if they have to go do the survey after the tornado hit, or after the flood hit, then it's going to slow everything down. Educational stuff, we were talking about workshops, videos. Yesterday, we were in Crawford County at the state park, and I was admiring some t-shirts that I might want to buy. And there was a coloring book on top of the case that the local Chamber of Commerce or something put out. And it was about Gus the gorilla from Pittsburgh State and all the cool places in Southeast Kansas that he had visited. And a lot of them were historic places. And it was a coloring book. And so like on one side was a coloring page, and on the other side, it talked all about this place or this, you know, whatever it was that, you know, Gus had visited and what all he had done at this place. The city of Newton did a kids activity book recently.
We used to ask
Coloring book or a little activity book. They paired that, they partnered with the library for a summer program where like for a couple of weeks in the afternoons, kids would meet at the library and they would do history projects. So they did downtown walking tours. They had speakers come in and do little presentations about, you know, cool people and places in the community that the kids didn't know about. They had no concept of. They went and visited different places. They did little projects where they, you know, built things out of different materials, and just like anything your mind can come up with, as long as it has a preservation/history focus, that could be something that could also be funded with an HPF grant. And it's within your guys' authority and purview. It's all under education and stuff like that. So, and then, I mean, as much as we were kind of talking bad about the university recently, I mean, I think there's opportunities there to reach out to and like, you know, partner on different projects with that, or utilize students for some kind of project, get them in, right, Ethan? Get them involved in some projects so that you can cross train and cross promote. I mean, this second one, broaden public awareness and participation, that's kind of similar, but our former director of the historical study, she brought up more than once that her kids, she saw her kids get really invested in recycling, because when they were little, it was a big push in the school system, like reduce, reuse, recycle, and all of these programs about the environment and recycling. And she's like, why can't we do that with preservation? And so making it more of a mainstream concept that we recycle our plastic bottles. Why don't we recycle our buildings? You know, that kind of thing. So that's something that's been on our horizon for a while. You know,
I mean, are there efforts to kind of like go to schools to educate students and stuff like that? Maybe like outreaches or something?
that would be, I mean, we would love to do that. We would love to do that. I'm sure you guys would love to do that. It's like the money and the personnel, you know, who in our office would do that? we have a couple of people that outreach is in their title, but like realistically on a day-to-day basis, they don't have time to do that. So,
What the AIA has done is create a kind of presentation or educational plan, I guess, that the teachers can use and then pull in. I don't know if you've been on any, but AIA Kansas City has done this. And then they have education committee, and whatever architects are on it that year, you volunteer to go to different classrooms and give the presentation, but it's also tied to a bigger plan.
yeah.
That sounds fun.
Yeah.
Well,
Third graders love that.
and I was surprised in reading the new historic plan that Kansas requires Kansas history in the middle schools. Was it third grade or fourth grade and middle schools? Which was news to me. And again, if we can just add that local preservation, local landmarks, local, significance of whatever it is we're sitting on. I mean,
Because every town has something
absolutely.
to state history.
Yeah,
Find
yeah.
one thing.
I'm heading to Lincoln, Kansas in September.
Yes.
I'm really looking forward to that. That little town is the birthplace of the Kansas State Equal Suffrage Association.
Okay. That makes sense. Yeah.
We have 2 projects there.
Yeah. There's a lot of projects.
It's a little dot, but it's like this amazing town.
It's Kelly, yeah. Kelly, yeah, Kelly Gorley, she's the Economic Development Director.
Okay.
She's made a lot of that happen.
Yeah.
Develop statewide preservation networks. I mean, I think that's critical. We have the CLGs, we have the SHPO. There are local preservation alliances and things. There's the Kansas Preservation Alliance, but we got to build some strength. We got to have some cross promotion. We got to have sort of like, we don't want to like duplicate efforts and step on each other's toes. I think that's hard. People love in this one is hands-on programming. People love hands-on stuff.
Mhm.
But it takes a lot of work to get those done. So wherever we can implement that, I think it's good. But I think something that I have talked to my staff about is that I want to do more of, we always we either host or support a state preservation conference every year, but then there's the AIA and the planning, and the League of Municipalities has, some sort of organization. There's the historians conference, there's the museums, conference, things that we could go to them. We don't have to put on a whole conference and try to get them to come to us. We can go to their conference and say, hey, we'll do a roundtable, we'll do a session, we'll do a workshop for you. We're free.
So can I put a plug in for when you are looking at dates for, I know it's so hard. It's a state preservation conference.
Yes.
It seems like it has landed on the 3rd Thursday of the month the last several years, and that is our HRC meeting.
We were looking at early May this next year. Had conflicts that we know of. I mean, May is hard with graduations, Mother's Day, Memorial Day. So early May, I think, is maybe the idea.
Where's it gonna be?
Topeka.
Oh, okay.
Easy.
So either the museum will be open or y'all will get a preview, depending on how far along they are.
Sure, yeah.
Hopefully it'll be open.
You mean Brown v. Board?
We hope to be like well into construction on the JRP.
See?
Oh, my.
Yeah. There's gonna be tons of things that we probably will have to like reduce it down or have multiple options for people to go to because there's so much going on. So yeah, usually when we have the conference in Topeka, it's at our facility at the Kansas Historical Society, but our museum gallery has been closed for the last year to do a rehab.
Right.
So if that's open, then yeah, we probably will use our facilities. We do have some other facilities out there that we could use, but we probably will be partnering with the city of Topeka to have it maybe downtown somewhere. So.
Good old Capitol, whatever.
Maybe the
hotel.
Capitol, but there's also places like there's a new event center called the Beacon
It's really nice.
It's
Yeah,
really nice. The, you know,
It's really
the
nice.
city has some other resources, maybe the city hall just got redone and things like that. So, we'll see. But if you guys have, well, yeah, things you want to see or things you want to be like, hey, I want to share this, let us know. Do you guys have a list locally of like contractors and craftspeople?
No.
Mm-mm.
And as the city, we can't recommend any fund.
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
But we get that a lot. I get those questions all the time and we just forward them to Lawrence Preservation Alliance.
So I mean,
They hold
that's on the
list.
partner. Do they have a list?
No, I don't know what Dennis Brown does when people call him. They probably.
you probably got, a friend or two, and.
I give them the state source list.
Jeez.
I was just gonna say, I mean, we do keep a source list and it has lots of, language in there about, we don't recommend, we're just letting you know these people have done preservation projects. Yeah, she announced it at the conference. Yeah, yeah. So, but I mean, I guess what you could do is like forward it to us and we'll put it on our list or use other partners like that. So I think that's a good thing. Is a lot of times people are like, well, I can't do preservation because I don't know anybody who restores windows. I don't know where I would get, someone to replicate this spindle or something. It's like, well, here's a name.
It's a real challenge, I
That's
think,
hard.
in Lawrence right now to
Yeah.
find contractors people doing the work. So
Somewhere in here is also a goal of developing trades more. So partnering with a community college, a trades program.
Apprenticeships would be fabulous, with like Peasley or something.
Yeah. It's just a matter of when we've talked to like community colleges before, they're like, well, how many students are you gonna have?
Mm-hmm,
No,
mm-hmm.
there's no program yet.
Right, exactly,
And they're like,
yeah.
we're not gonna develop a program until you tell us how many
Mhm,
students we're
Yeah,
gonna have.
catch 22.
Well,
20.
okay.
I
don't. So that's been a challenge so far,
Sure.
but something that's badly needed because it's very hard to get a contractor.
Well,
and
they're
someone
out
who's
there
skilled.
doing it.
Yeah,
Right.
But
they're
figuring it out as they do it.
busy.
Mhm.
This goes back to what we're talking, integrate historic practices in community planning. So again, just making sure that like it's part of the conversation. So if you have a comprehensive plan, is there survey in there? If you have a disaster plan, is there survey in there?
But talking about the survey, is there a map? I feel like I saw it somewhere, but I don't know if it was here. Is
Yeah.
there a map that shows the time period or the year that each major development was platted?
Mm-mm. There's the map.
That seems,
And
it
that's-
seems like it would be, research intensive to figure it out, but also really helpful. Yeah,
That might guide your survey. plan.
exactly.
We had one of those maps at the town I worked in and like GIS department, they were able to throw that together pretty quickly. But they had
Just do it based on date of plats or?
we gave them a list of the subdivision plats in town. And then they were able to find it that way. And then also they did an annexation map for us just to show like
Oh, nice.
what areas were annexed into the city where, when,
Yeah.
what time.
I think
Yeah.
maybe it was Cape Girardeau that I saw that.
Mm.
We got a lot of data also from the property appraiser's website because they'd have like the data construction for a house, for instance. So they'd be able to colorize like different neighborhoods.
That would be good, because, I was just driving here, I was remembering, why Barker in Connecticut swerved at 15th, because 15th was the city boundary. So, south of 15th was country back in the early day, So it would be fascinating, like you say, to do it by periods, so you'd have a sense of where the quote history is concentrated around the downtown area and in North Lawrence. Downtown North Lawrence, there.
This goal about funding, I mean, obviously our tax credit program is really successful. Like I said, it's probably one of the best in the country. I do think we have a little bit of a problem with like the tax credits drives the boat now.
Mm-hmm.
And people want the tax credits, and so hurry up and get me on the National Register so that I can get the tax credits.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't necessarily do it for the right reasons, and they're trying to like hurry the process along, and it's not really a fast process, and then they get frustrated. So I don't know how to solve that problem, because obviously I like the fact that buildings are getting rehabbed and, preserved. But it is hard going back to your guys' conundrum of convincing people to put things in the local register. If you don't have an incentive, because the state and national registers do, and why would I put my property on the local register? So finding some other reason to convince people that they should love
It's the
historic.
right thing to do.
You should love them for their history and how
Yeah.
they feel and how they benefit the community, and they promote
Mhm.
tourism, and they do, these other things.
Mhm.
But convincing people about that can take some work.
On KHRI, they have, I just pulled up the map here, and you guys have a lot of historic districts, it seems like, but maybe finding some of the more successful ones and pointing them out to people, saying it worked here, and
Yeah.
what we learned from this situation. It might not work for your situation, but here's how we can adapt it or whatever.
Well, I think we're doing pretty good on, well, I know of a handful of us who do tours. So, Bob Dinsdale does the downtown Lawrence tour. He's got a new book. Do you know about his new book? About downtown Lawrence buildings? And he does East Lawrence, Old West. I forget his other neighborhoods. I think those are the main ones.
Yeah.
And then I've been doing the Oak Hill and Maple Grove Cemetery. There's other tours that I'm blanking on it right now. Oh, we do the Underground Railroad tours around Juneteenth and so forth with Grover Barn and the Robert Miller House. And so, I mean, there's some, we're,
Well, I was thinking too, like what you were talking about, Glenn, you guys have some historic districts that have been historic districts for a long time.
mhm.
And what if there was a study of like what have been the outcomes of this listing? It was listed in the
Mm.
70s or 80s. What has really been the impact of the designation over that time? Like has property values been stable? Has it really, affected in any way who lives there, or what development has happened or hasn't happened? Like there could be some sort of like, I don't know what you would call it, not really like an economic development, or an economic impact.
Well, again, why it matters, why it's
Like really,
important.
because I think, there's a lot of myths and misconceptions, and I feel like something
mhm.
like that could be like, yes,
Mhm.
Old West Lawrence had this demographic, had these values, had these kind of things in the 80s. And then this is how it has changed or over time or whatever. You could actually look at real data.
Or even like, I know the Johnson block isn't that old of a designation, but I mean, the houses in that area aren't that much different from the houses a couple streets over, and maybe you could compare like,
Very contrast.
how many houses have been demolished and rebuilt, or, property values or whatever you wanted to try and improve.
Okay, I think it's time for a scheduled break. So we're going to break for a few minutes and then we'll come back and do our planning.
So we were just talking about, Lynn said, this might take more than just one session here, and we only have like an hour, right? Okay. So maybe we'll just kind of brainstorm things that you guys think would be great for preservation planning purposes, to have action items for the HRC. But Gwen pointed out that she was looking at KHRI. And this is kind of a good place to start, if nothing else, until you guys get some of those other maps, maybe. Because you can see big areas where there's no blue dots.
Right.
And those might be areas to focus on for survey, or to at least look at further. With HPF grants, we tend to want to fund intensive surveys. So when we say survey in terms of like a grant, we mean like you have a boundary and you're gonna look at every property in that boundary and you're gonna do like the fullest extent of research you can do for that kind of project. There's also, we could though fund, just because we don't usually doesn't mean we can't, reconnaissance survey. So if there's a bigger area, like an entire quadrant of town or something.
Like the east.
Yeah,
Yeah.
or the
So we
entire
have-
community.
That's what we have in East Lawrence, and it's not helpful
It's
for
not.
us. We have a picture that was taken in 1990 and nothing
Right.
about the property,
The-
but yet it'll show on here that
Yeah.
it's surveyed.
Right, because we have a survey record of it.
Mhm.
So the thought with reconnaissance survey is it's great to pin down where you want to do more intensive survey. Because if you do a drive, sometimes we call it a windshield survey. If you just drive through an area and you're like, there's not really anything here that we need to worry about, then like, that's probably not an area that you want to focus on.
Yeah.
Well, reconnaissance is also good if you want to do a community-wide survey of a particular building type, like Manhattan recently did the entire city, they did commercial mid-century modern buildings. And so they had to start with a reconnaissance survey to even find where all those things were. And then they narrowed it down and did intensive survey on like 50 or something.
Oh,
So yeah,
okay.
it did that. So that's another project type that you could look at.
So a couple of things for you to be aware of that staff is working on is one, we have been in discussions with Lawrence Preservation Alliance and looking at ways to come up with a plan to systematically survey the city like we've done the county. And so that's something that we're trying to figure out what that would look like financially for the city and realistically as far as, so it would be good to have the commission weigh in, and I'll bring some more of that information to you, but it would be good to have the commission weigh in on, we used to have a priority map, low, mid, and high priority. And so we don't have anything like that really anymore. So looking at those areas, that would.
That's why I wanted to do this
priority.
empty section of East Lawrence, like from 11th to 15th.
And probably if you're gonna do that, yeah, I was gonna say, probably if you're gonna do that, because like what Lynn was saying, a lot of those blue dots are just, you can click on any one of them if they'll pop up. If you click on details, it'll show you what we actually have in that. And so there's a little bit, yeah, there's a little bit of information on this one, but there's just one photo from 1995. Hey, you know Brad Finch?
Sure do.
Yep. He was doing this a long time.
In the talks with LPA, have you talked about involving KUs?
We have not.
Because they have a certificate program now of historic preservation. They're starting a master's. Which I don't know if it would be helpful or too many city resources to create that. Or if they could create it's in their curriculum that they must complete a survey.
Oh, really? Okay.
I think it is.
Do you know how many students are interested or how many have enrolled in that? Okay,
Well, I mean, typically we have up to 20 students,
okay.
and that's just for the certificate, and that's per semester, not even per year. So it keeps
Sure.
rolling. Yeah,
Okay.
we have 4 courses there, and then 20 students per class.
Right.
So we go through the technological aspect and issues with NPS surveys and all that. So we just touch around all those aspects of preservation. Well, a lot of planning stuff, section 1, criteria for listing and stuff like that. Yeah.
Do y'all do any actual writing of National Register nominations?
Well, I would say right now it's limited to like building preservation plans. Yeah, but they tend to teach us an aspect of it. But because of the semester time, it's not easy to do it in a certificate course. But once we have a master's program, then definitely.
Mhm.
And I think that will begin next year.
Yeah, and I
That's it.
think I saw it on Amy's list
Yeah.
to do a National Register nomination, because that's what other schools do.
Okay, that's what we
Right.
did at SEMO.
Mhm.
That's why Cape Girardeau has.
Well, and up until she quit teaching, when Shelley did the preservation law course, they all had to write a National Register nomination for your final paper.
See, that would be great. What a great project.
I
Yeah,
always tell people that's what a nomination is. It's like a college master's level.
it is. Yeah.
paper. So be prepared.
Okay, so surveying systematically the city, so we'll talk about that a little bit more. One of the other things that staff has on their list is trying to brainstorm a way to apply for a grant to look at the city through an equity lens and look for those underrepresented communities and where we don't have properties listed that maybe should be like La Yarda is not listed or any of the things associated with that. And, you know, those types of things that we're missing in our history that we really need to get out there. And we don't know what we don't know, you know. So that would be something else that staff would suggest that we would look at some type of study to hopefully show us where our
See, that's
underrepresented.
why I'm looking at the rest of East Lawrence over there. And the other place to go is North Lawrence, because there's nothing in North Lawrence except the UP Depot. And North Lawrence was the black belt.
There's nothing on the register, you mean?
Well, there's, in terms of, this is a different map. When I click the Lawrence Historic Resources, there's only the UP Depot. There's nothing else in North Lawrence. So I'm not sure what all these
little-
other buildings are.
The little cross is a listed property. All
Yeah, that's already.
These are what's
historic.
been surveyed.
The blue
So we
is
do
just
have
like
a
as a
North
record,
Lawrence
yeah.
survey.
Oh, from 1990?
It's pretty old. I
It's,
can't remember.
I've read it. Yeah, I think it's 1990.
Yeah,
Barbara somebody.
one of a couple of things, like I had mentioned, municipal stadium. The other one is, believe it or not, the UP Depot is not on the National Register. It's just the Kansas Register because we actually listed it before the replica tower was put back on it. So it wasn't eligible for the National Register. So now it has its full body back, and it was just never followed through to put it on the National
Oh,
Register.
we should put that on the list.
There is
Dave's
also,
mural mess up the stadium?
Do I?
Will Dave's mural mess up the stadium?
Ops.
I don't know.
Not mess it up, but
I think it'll impact it. I don't think it'll keep it from being, was it on there, do you know, when we did the eligibility?
I can't visualize it right now.
I'm trying to remember if the mural was on there when we did the
Is it on
PSIQ.
the KJR?
It was there in 2012.
A couple of things I was gonna follow up on what Lynn was saying. So, I mean, obviously Historic Preservation Fund through us, you can apply for grants to like the underrepresented communities project. But there's also the Park Service has other HPF money that Congress told them they specifically have to focus on different things. So there are civil rights focused grants for properties that are associated with the African American Civil Rights Movement. There is another grant program called HER, that's historic. What's the E stand for? Anyway, something resources, but it's about, maybe it's equity. But it's about any kind of civil rights, movement related properties. I mean, it's just paint, right?
Yeah, it was there. Okay, when we did the PSIQ and they said it was eligible.
Okay.
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 Well, then that reminds me of Woody Park up in North Lawrence, next to the hospital.
There's nothing left there that.
I know there's nothing left. Oh, well, the other thing that is left would be that we can't have is McCarter Bird's Tannery, limestone building that he used for a tannery, but it's all that's left of Walruf's beer brewery
Yeah.
along that strip,
Yeah.
So they also,
but it's privately owned right now.
they also have an underrepresented communities grant specifically for, and that's the one that the National Park Service chief was talking about. It's up to you to define what's underrepresented in your community. So you can apply for that, and some of those grants don't have match. It's a competitive advantage, but it's not required. I was also gonna say, because you were talking about like the depot. We have found, we had an intern. Well, actually, she was like more of a volunteer because she was with us for a couple of years, but she had a scholarship that specifically required her to do volunteer work, and it had to be related to like equity issues. And so she wanted to volunteer with us, and we got her to look at several National Register nominations where, like we were talking about earlier, it was listed to the National Register because it was a Queen Anne house, let's say. But she went back and did research and found out that like the person who lived there was this, amazing female architect or something, you know what I mean? So going back and rewriting nominations, older nominations, especially that were written
Before they had any criteria.
before they had criteria, before they had any kind of, the National Register nomination for the state capitol is 1 page.
Yeah, it's
Well, Old West Florence, till we redid it, was 3.
Yeah. So there could be, a building that's listed, it's been listed on the National Register or it's listed on the state register, but now it needs to go back because the nomination was written in the 70s and it just is not, it's not helpful,
So-
it's not useful.
When you say civil rights, is it restricted to the 1950s and 60s, or could it refer to the 19th century?
So the African American Civil Rights one is from the beginning of the transatlantic slave trade
Okay.
up through, I think, the 1960s or 70s. I think there's a cutoff. But then there's this other grant that is like anything having to do with civil rights, and it's your definition of what that entails. So it could be suffrage, it could be anything. Yeah.
We got bunches.
wow, there's a big hole there in the middle, isn't there?
Yeah.
Right here, is this what you were talking
Yeah.
about, Gwen?
That empty spot.
Oh, university.
Oh, I can tell you what this
Oh,
is.
no, it's been.
This is University.
Right. So what's that called in between?
From 19th,
I mean, it's
Tennessee,
Orient.
Kentucky, from 19th up to about 15th, this was all African-American housing. Gone. And that's where the Babcock apartments are. Because I studied a whole bunch of folks here. And that's what explains, in my view, I haven't proven it, conclusively, but that explains why these older homes are gone. And this is all Babcock, what do they call it? Babcock Gardens or Birchwood Gardens, or it's got some.
Along 19?
No, stretching from Tennessee and Kentucky up.
When were those built?
1970s. And they're
Those are
all,
all small homes.
well,
The ones at the bottom are like little
Yeah,
H's.
see the Babcock?
here it is,
18
Babcock,
and
there,
19.
yeah, it goes,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, so I meant from 19th, I'm trying to see, 19th up to about 15th.
It doesn't go that.
It doesn't go at 16th?
I think it goes, I mean, the 18th, I can definitely see they're like little H's. Those are definitely.
Yeah, these are all duplex guys, okay, and I think
Those are the fourplex.
fourplexes
There's
here.
a 2
Okay.
above.
All right, this was African American. I have a bunch of, families that lived here that I know of for sure. And then there were other families, American families who lived.
And that,
here
yeah,
too,
those
but-
are smaller. homes.
Yes, but a lot of those.
So if that area like was like redeveloped in the 70s, I can see why probably it hasn't been surveyed yet,
Oh, yeah.
but you should survey it now because
Yeah.
we did a National Register eligibility and on a mansard roof apartment complex the other day in Kansas City and determined it eligible. So, and so I'm not saying this is eligible, but I'm just
Right.
saying like I could see where like those would be eligible for 1970s architecture. And
Yeah.
then part of the story is
Guess
how
what?
this property developed over time.
Place, yeah.
Exactly,
Right.
because also urban renewal is now
a historic period.
Well, see, that's it. Yeah, it's all under the urban renewal.
West of,
Yeah.
west
Yeah.
of KU between
Yeah.
Iowa and KU,
Mm-hmm.
like between Ninth and, I don't know, west of KU up by past there, Stratford University Drive. There's some new houses in there, but there's a good collection around Hillcrest, you know, and even
In
north
this
of
area
Ninth-
over
Ninth
here,
Street.
it's a great,
Yeah,
mid-century modern
yeah.
neighborhood.
There's a lot that have been replaced with modern, but
There's also a home, friend of mine asked me to do some research on 1646 Mississippi. I don't think it's on any register yet, but it was designed by the first female KU architect graduate. Not too shabby. And yeah, 1646 Mississippi.
yeah, so that'd be down by Lawrence High, north of Lawrence.
Yeah,
Yeah.
anyway, and,
University Place.
Yeah.
there you go. Yes, it is.
You got it covered.
It is. I hope it's covered. I hope so. Oh, I think it is. I talked with Ann at that meeting. And
I
yeah.
lived at 1805 Illinois and they tore it down. A different house that's
Yeah,
not.
there's some great ones there.
So sad.
So does the commission have, or so it sounds like we're all kind of, hearing consensus, and we'll bring this up at a public meeting, for you, before you take action. So I'm just trying to kind of get a feel for the three of you that are here now. It's maybe this idea that staff was pursuing to come up with some type of plan to do the survey citywide and come up, or do you foresee us finding these holes? Do you foresee us doing the map with the dates associated with our multiple property thematic nomination? Where do you see that priority for survey coming from?
I think I would approach it with the map with the dates and then fill in the holes and then improve the survey of the oldest areas that are not on any kind of design guideline or district already. But that's a lot.
Okay, so
Well, yeah, I mean, ideally, I'd like to cover the rest of the city, but I would like to start with the 19th century, the late 19th century buildings that we haven't already surveyed. And then,
Or have minimal information from the early 90s.
yeah, and maybe extending to the early 19 or 1900s, 1990s, what? Say it again.
We have drive-by surveys, you know, some of the areas of North Lawrence, for example, but it's only a small picture and minimal information.
Again, I'd let my biased focus is African-American history. And there's just an awful lot of folks that people don't know about, people-wise, you know. And the problem with North Lawrence, of course, is that it faced flooding. So some of the most significant homes are gone just because of flooding.
So I mean, that's the difficulty without doing an intensive survey, you're only going to get, this is somebody who just basically looked at it from the street and said, it's a cute little bungalow, bulk house, whatever they call it.
Mhm.
It's wood. It's in good condition. Next, we have no idea who lived there. We have no idea,
Right.
you know, what the history of the building is or anything like that. So it would take some more intensive survey to tease out who built it, why it was built.
Right,
You know.
yeah, and as I've mentioned before, I started, I've been working on African-American history in Lawrence, and every time there's an obituary, it says so-and-so died at this address. So I have a list of all the addresses and then the years of, you know, who
Yeah.
was owning what,
Yeah.
when, you know?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's a beginning, but it's, you know, it's obvious, and I've done it by neighborhood. So I have North Lawrence, I have East Lawrence, I have, you know, Oriad.
Do city directories call out some of that information?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. All that can be verified. Yeah. I live on the city directories, looking at who's living where and when, and, because a lot of Black folks were moving all the time. They were renting, or they were boarding, or they were, so they didn't necessarily own places. They were there for a bit and then they, moved 2 blocks over.
Somebody,
It's
Yeah.
tricky in
Yeah.
terms of, because that's part of the problem with the African American, I think, population, because they're,
any of the underrepresented, they're just not in the records. That's why.
well, they're not there long enough in one place. Okay. And if you're going to use that criteria of what did they do while they were living at this address, you know what I mean? Then you're only looking at 3
Oh.
years or 4 or whatever, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's tougher.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and that's what I'm saying is criterion B is hard.
Yeah,
Criterion A and criterion C are much easier.
right. That's what I
So
was trying to-
criterion A is just events or trends in our history.
Okay,
So if you can tie it to this property is associated with the, African American, residential experience in Lawrence. Even if it's not tied to a specific person,
yeah.
it's just tied to a specific,
Well, see,
time
that's
in
where-
history, then that works fine.
Because the thing about Black men, they were incredibly active Republicans. The meetings were downtown at different places. So that's really where
A
those.
lot of times that it's like churches, like in Topeka, some of our
Yeah.
churches are listed for architecture or
Right.
because they were the places where
Exactly.
political and civil
Yeah,
rights
so
stuff.
sometimes it's it's either at churches or it's downtown public buildings. It might be at Liberty Hall, it might be at what used to be Fraser. There's a courthouse. They were at the old courthouse, which is long gone. But in terms of their residences, yeah, they didn't hold meetings at their residences necessarily, but their residences are scattered.
What's the name of that other neighborhood, the Mexican American neighborhood?
La Yarda,
La Yarda, it's not a neighborhood.
Oh,
It's
it's just-
actually just a remnant of a
it's a
site.
remnant.
Okay.
Yeah, it's long gone.
There's some,
1950s flood wiped it out.
Okay.
Well, here's another question is, do you have priorities for areas that they're not just threatened by redevelopment, but also maybe environmental factors like flooding?
Mhm.
Do you want to prioritize getting some of those areas surveyed or?
Is the
in a
Burroughs
flood
Creek Trail, in terms of the flooding situation, is that pretty much, is the trail above what was the flooding?
Yes.
Okay. Because that strip, and that's part of what we're looking at here, is this strip that went from 11th and it goes down to 19th. And
Yeah,
so
I
there's
think-
But
homes on
also
either
anywhere
side of
along the
that,
river, really.
Yeah,
You know,
or a creek or a.
which is part of why there's emptiness drainage. You know what I mean? Is those were homes that were flooded over a period of years.
Yeah.
Um,
Because again, we're seeing more and more, of course, 100-year floods happen
Oh, yeah.
every 2 years now.
Right.
But if FEMA or even the
Yeah.
state environmental is going to come in and help with some sort of
mhm.
disaster, then they're going to need to know where your historic resources are.
I was driving by the other day on 11th. There is a sign that have you seen that where it says flood depth? And it has feet going up, to above the street to 5 feet or 6 feet. And I'm thinking, oh my God, is that, how high the floodwaters used to get at that point? I mean, because this is the bottoms, right? It was called the bottoms on East Lawrence for a reason.
Do you have a lot of like commercial or industrial outfits coming in and buying up properties?
Yes, well, the Tholer, I'm thinking, how do you pronounce his name? Krish?
Anthony Kresnick.
Krisnick. He's developing a lot, all the Delaware, Pennsylvania area that.
I mean, I am encouraging the CLGs to do more residential survey because I feel like everybody's downtown, like because of the tax credits, it was like, let's get downtown listed so we can. Are there other like commercial nodes elsewhere that haven't been done?
Yeah, I was just talking about this with a friend. You know where Checkers is? That used to be I'm sorry. You know where Checkers is. That whole property used to be Fred Gleed's meat, produce, and poultry, eggs, grocery store, which is why I find it so fascinating that it's still a grocery store.
Mhm.
But that whole block or that whole section was his.
'Cause it's interesting, like in Topeka, we have several little 1970s shopping centers
Mhm.
that are very distinctive. They have like lots of wood and stuff and,
Mm.
the little, I mean, they're strip malls, but like,
Right.
they have integrity and they have
Yeah.
significance to the community and.
Then I
Okay, so we're looking at, maybe the map where the annexation on it and the plats on it, and looking at getting, the remainder of the late 19th century areas that aren't surveyed as the priority. Is that,
What
Mhm.
was the first item that you listed? I just want to make, is this the like the time lapse type that?
yeah,
Okay.
okay. And then going to the areas that haven't been surveyed.
Mhm. You mean by intensive surveys that haven't been intensively surveyed
haven't been surveyed at all.
or at
I
all?
was about to say, do you see it as a priority to go to the places that haven't been surveyed at all? Or to look at some of these surveys that we know are just a photograph?
Well, like I say, stuff below 15th is likely to be built after, what, 19, yeah, what's Leonard? What year is that home built?
Go down a little bit.
Oh, these are ranches. Yeah,
65.
65, yeah. See, I'm. And we had the example of Barker.
And this is
It's,
part of that Barker.
Yeah, it's part of the
Okay.
Barker, yeah. That's mostly 50, 67.
What I don't want you guys to get into the habit of is what has happened in Salina. They did a reconnaissance survey in 1984, and then they haven't done anything since.
Mm,
And so their focus, like all of their stuff, is focused on things from the 1930s and older.
mhm.
They don't have anything from the
Right.
40s up to now the 70s.
See, yeah, my personal preference is the 19th century and early 20th, maybe up to 1910, 1920.
Right. But if none of that stuff had been preserved when it was 20 years old,
Right.
it wouldn't be preserved now. So we have to kind of like keep thinking about that too, because what's important to kids that are in school right now today,
Mhm.
the 80s was 40 years ago.
Sure,
They have
sure,
no-
right.
So,
Yeah,
if we ever want to see a brutalist building preserved, we're going to have to teach kids now
yeah,
to
And we
like it.
did talk about resurveying downtown
Yeah.
Yeah.
for that reason.
And several other sealed, Leavenworth just did that. Newton is doing that right now too.
Okay.
They did a historic district several years ago, and it's time to resurvey it because things have become contributing or non-contributing, and also they realized that they didn't go out far enough.
That's our
really
downtown
captured,
district is a nightmare.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, since so many people have been talking, I'm just gonna say, I would like to hear what you say, what you think. About what the priority.
I like the time lapse. I think first, and then filling in where we have no information.
No,
That would be my second priority. Because
So when you say
we don't
that,
know it all.
we don't want to fall into the trap of only doing that once and never going back though.
Yeah, I
But
mean,
right now, we have no information.
it's hard.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have no information.
Mm-hmm.
Because you could just resurvey what you have
Yeah, I mean, we could,
forever.
Oh, yeah, that, sure, you can always add new information.
Projects can go concurrently. You have to focus on the old ones and then begin to fill in the gaps.
Mhm.
So we don't necessarily need to look at it as a one-way thing.
Mhm.
You do a major and a minor.
Well, that's what I was gonna ask too, because I'm assuming, however long your plan is covering, if this is like, 5 years or whatever. But there could conceivably be in the next year or something, another neighborhood like University Place that comes forward and says, well, we want a historic district, and then
Mhm.
do you have flexibility to say, okay, we're gonna switch tasks over here? Or do you have to say like, I'm sorry, you're not on the agenda until 2035?
Right.
Sorry.
Right.
Yeah.
So how do you come up with a survey plan.
If enough members of that community want it to happen, then, I mean, the only thing stopping it is time, staff time, like people time doing the survey. So if they put in a certain number of hours or percentage of the work, then we could move along on this.
Yeah. Or if we worked out an alternative, like that third party designation situation or
So
something.
this is what our downtown looks like now. You see the odd shape that it is, and that's because when we have all these out spots, they were non-contributing buildings at the time. And the National Register coordinator didn't believe in having non-contributing buildings on corners. And so like this whole block is left out of the downtown district.
That's a hygiene house.
All of Vermont Street. It's not in the district.
The other thing too was that it used to be kind of just a thing where you would cut off the period of significance at the 50-year mark. And now they're encouraging you to cut it off at some place that is logical.
Yes.
Like when
I never
development
understood
actually, oh, it's so silly. And so now, like we just did Kansas City and the period of significance goes up to 1979. Because that's when really like the last major buildings were built. So it's not, it's less than 50 years old. And we're gonna have to go back and read the
Right.
denomination in like 5
Yes.
years. So
Yeah.
they're maybe coming around and being a little bit more realistic, you know, so.
For some reason, that all downtown was done, but yeah. There's.
So for your plat map, you guys already have a plat map, so they just need to.
We just need to get the dates on there or symbolized on
Yeah.
there.
Well, what we did was also like do by decade, so there's not so many
Yeah.
colors.
Yeah, we have a lot of information on GIS.
That's awesome.
It's probably all in there. They just need to program it differently to show up, to pop up.
We do have an annexation as well.
Oh, good.
Okay, so it sounds like we're looking for a survey plan, and that would be the primary goal. We talked about a National Register nomination for municipal stadium. We've talked about a National Register nomination for the UP Depot. We've talked about an equity study. Is there anything else?
The equity study would be for the underrepresented communities.
Right, looking at it, and that might guide where you want to spend your survey
Yeah.
too. It may alter that,
It
so you
seems like
may.
we need a guide, something other than Jeannie's personal preference. Not that that's not carrying some weight. It's
you know-
just-
Views.
It needs to live past your years.
Well, if you want to talk about underrepresented.
No, I want to talk about a strategy to figure out what the priority is and how to get there.
Because we could do it different ways. You can do it geographically, you can do it by time period, you can do it by association, like the underrepresented communities, you could do it by property type, right?
I think I see the equity project as separate than
Yeah.
the survey project. I think we would apply for 2 grants. One would be whatever section of the survey we decide we want to survey quadrant X and apply for an HPF grant for that. But the equity project would be to apply for a grant to do the study to help identify those places that not necessarily that we need to survey, but maybe survey and or list like things that we're missing in our history. Like if you read our multiple property documentation form, it may come up with something that's an amendment to that, that.
So the study would be looking at like all of your nominations, all of your listed properties, your multiple property documents and say like, there are glaring holes here of
Right,
people, places, things that are missing.
right.
That's kind of how we were.
I don't know if that's of interest to anybody else. It's one of my interests because I think we're missing it.
That's what we were planning to do with like we were talking about the markers earlier. We like looked at all of our markers and we're like, man, we have every conceivable marker about the Santa Fe and Oregon Trail. We don't have more of those.
Right.
But we only have like one about a woman. We only have.
Oh, yeah.
We don't have anything about aviation. We don't have anything, and so it's like there's certain themes and certain eras and
Right.
certain topics that are probably missing.
Because we did an Underground Railroad app. That includes Grover and Miller but other places downtown that are long gone. I mean, it's, so those things are available online, for people to do their own self-guided tours of stop here, stop there. This used to be here, this used to be there. It used to be a, cabin for whatever. So explain to me, Lynn, what you're talking about. What do you mean by a study of filling the holes of what study?
Well, looking at everything that we have, like what we've surveyed, what our National Register nominations say, the history of the city and saying, okay, you don't have anything surveyed or listed in the Lawrence Register or the National Register that represents the Hispanic community that was associated with Loyarda. So we know we need to look at those resources, whether they're there or whether they're not there, or what we need to do to address that. So,
because in terms of the Mexican,
I mean, that's an easy one to pull out because everybody knows Loyarda, but
right.
What are we missing? I don't know what we're missing. We're really ahead of the game in many ways, and that we did the National Register nominations in East Lawrence for the North Rhode Island district and then South Rhode Island and New Hampshire Street districts. And those are worker housing, they're vernacular. So we've got a lot of that. So we're ahead of the game on capturing some of the vernacular architecture. And certainly on the Lawrence Register, we've tried to get to that because the worker housing was so important to the history of Lawrence. So we may not find any glaring holes. We may be, right where we need to be. And
there's also I'm trying to think of, and I don't know enough about Lawrence history, but were there industries that were important to the development of the community? And you start looking at it and you're like, oh, we don't have anything listed that's related to that, whether it's a worker housing, whether it's a factory or the remnants of something.
The railroad and this was all industrial, and that's the worker housing, was in the East Lawrence area, which I think we've covered or not,
Yeah. But that was a surprise to us when we were looking at markers. We're like, we don't have anything in the state of Kansas about aviation. Or
not even Wichita,
our marker program, even Wichita. And we're like,
did you know
that's kind of
the Lawrence Airport was
what we do. And
the Lawrence Airport was a place in the 1910s.
But I think a lot of it, and that has been a criticism. One of the criticisms of the National Register is it's responsive, right? It's people coming forward and saying, I want to list my house in the National Register.
Right.
And it's been sort of affluent white people that do that.
Yeah.
And so we need to do a better job of just going out and being like, hey, your history is important too.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Because the thing about Loyarda is very, very important. And in terms of the whole Mexican community, what became the Mexican American community started in the 1920s. So I don't know how many of the homes where, Mexican Americans lived, if they built them or if they moved into what was there. And then pass it down, with families or what have you. I mean, that we don't know.
What else was on your brainstorm list?
Well, I don't know about the mid-century modern. I'm on the fence about it just because I know it's a trend right now. And I know we have some pockets or individual.
Back in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah. I think it's a trend right now because people who grew up with those buildings are getting to a certain age.
Right.
And you don't know what it
I know what it means. I'm saying I'm on the fence
Yeah,
about whether or not to make it a priority is what I'm saying.
No, it's just one of the gaps.
it's just a gap. I mean, I
Okay.
think looking at like decades or
Yeah.
decades, I think is a good way to
Okay.
maybe prioritize some things, but. Because that was a surprise to us. We got a national or a section 106 review on these apartments. And my reviewer was like, they're built in the 70s. And I go, 1970 what? And he goes, oh, 72. I was like, it's 52. That's 50 years old. And then we got to looking at them. I said, are these mansard designs? Is that something that was a trend in the 70s?
Mhm.
And Washington State SHPO actually has a really good style guide of all these different kinds of property styles. And they actually have an entire webpage devoted to like 1970s.
So what is mansard?
So like French Second Empire was built like in the 1870s, right? Italianate with like the mansard roof that comes down. So in the 70s, they did a interpretation of that on a lot of apartment buildings, some houses. It's like a French influence. But the roof line comes down over like the top story of the building.
I think
Okay.
you should invest in the field guide.
I know, I'm
Yeah.
debating about buying that puppy.
Yes.
Buy it.
Yes, just buy it. But anyway, it was just sort of like the entire staff was like, hold your pearls. Like, it's okay, guys. We're moving
Yeah.
into the 70s. It's all right. But yeah, like something.
Okay.
I know Haskell's probably
Huh.
tribal, but like, what about the area
It's
around there?
federal.
Oh, it is?
Yep, it's
Yeah.
all federal property.
It's an NHL.
And, yeah, it is, right?
It's an NHL.
yeah.
Mhm. Well, certain buildings
Certain,
on.
yes.
Yeah, I wish we could do Haskell.
I mean, like the area around, like the housing around.
we
it.
can-
Things associated with it.
Yeah, there was, it was way out, and so there's not really anything associated with it, but there is a neighborhood there that we have a historic district, the Breedsdale Historic District.
Yes.
That is right adjacent to it. It's not as large as I wish it were, but we didn't have the property ownership. So we have this historic district right here.
That's right. Those are the homes that, as you entered the gate,
Yeah.
that were, yeah. Exactly.
And probably more of the area should be in that district.
Probably, yeah.
Really, all of this
Yeah.
should be in the district, but
Yeah.
these, we narrowed it down. It was based on property ownership, support for the district nomination.
Yeah.
When that was listed.
Well, then that would be a one to do is to finish Breezdale.
So it's not even shown as surveyed.
Well, and I think, yeah, I was gonna say that too. I forgot, like, KHRI is an imperfect thing. Some things are surveyed. You guys may have a survey and it didn't ever get uploaded to KHRI. Or there are glitches sometimes where things are not mapped because the survey form wasn't in the right format. So if you search a particular address in the neighborhood, it may come up with a form, but it's not mapping because the address is on the
Okay,
wrong
yeah.
line or something. So just kind of, you may have to.
Does the federal go, Lynn, south there?
All of this.
So it does include, okay, because all of that it was what, 940 acres was Haskell Institute, which encompassed, at 23rd down, 23rd down to, all of this, Broken Arrow Park, the Wakarusa Fire, et cetera, and the wetlands. That was all federal Haskell Institute property. And then as you see, that's this property, I believe, was also Haskell Institute that became a housing development.
And Park Hill is actually on my list of places that needs to be surveyed.
That's what I wondered. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, you can also do.
Those limits are this.
Indian Hills has not been surveyed.
So is Park
Either
Hills
You can skip.
Yeah.
and then Indian Hills is more like 60s or,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Indian Hills.
I mean, especially because you guys are the City Historic Resources Commission and you want to do things for, the most benefit of the community and stuff sometimes. You could also do thematic things like all of the parks. Just do survey of all of those so that you know where the historic resources are in each park. And then, if some of them are eligible for listing, consider that. Manhattan did their cemetery, their zoo, and a linear park is all like right next to each other. So they surveyed all that together and then they're gonna go back and list the cemetery, but.
Centennial has been done. No kidding. Huh. It's good.
Plus there's the hyper, oh, no, it's.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it's not, oh, I know, yeah, that's I know that house, yeah. That is a, 19th century, I forget, the curate Dudley Wiggins house, yeah. It was one of the first LPA.
Yeah.
Um,
Purple is the National Register and teal is.
and then, Gary and Jerry's house has been done. Yep. They're gone now. Somebody else lives there. It's a great place. Have you been inside? The hyperbolic house?
It's great.
It is fun. It's great.
So wasn't it up for sale not too long ago?
Yeah. It's changed.
So systematic survey obviously is huge. That equity study, it will be huge. And then if there's smaller things you guys wanted to do in between, you might just have a list of things because like I can see a situation like where we get loaded, here's a bucket of money, Shippo. And we come to you guys and we say, we got some money. If you had sort of a list in your pocket of little projects.
What would
That
be
might
an
be good.
example of?
Like a coloring book or a walking tour, something like that, that maybe is just a few $1,000s, but
A training.
a training. NAPC, like we were talking about, does the trainings. They can either send people out and do an in-person training or they can do it by Zoom. Sending you
How
all.
long are those trainings usually?
You can
Hours?
pick, I don't know how many hours, but I think you can do like a 1 day or a 1.5 day. And it's like an all-day thing.
Because I know I had trouble just getting
Yeah.
people for
Yeah.
4 hours, so it's really hard when it's a volunteer board
Yeah.
to.
Yeah. I don't know, they may have other options too. I think they may just have like certain. Because those are like the camps, but I think you could also just be like, hey, can we get a speaker to talk on the subject? And it might just be 2 hours or something. I don't know.
They do them online too. I think,
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be in person.
Doesn't have to be. But those are relatively inexpensive. They might be a couple $1,000s at the most.
We need to come up with that list, right? We got timeline, systematic, equity, and then odds and ends list. I like the coloring book. We don't have kids, but. Coloring book.
I know, we need to find a cartoonist we should be able to easily find a cartoonist in town, heck.
Or like, look at the one from Newton, because it was like more of an activity book. So there was like a word search. Find what's different between these pictures. And it was like,
You know who already does books is the Juneteenth, Lawrence Juneteenth already does activity or Black History activity book. I can't remember if it's a coloring book or not for Juneteenth. I don't know if they've ever put it online though. But I know they've done it the past 2-3 years, I think.
and that includes things like the printing,
Mhm.
like we can fund the printing and stuff.
Mhm.
Because I know, like you were saying, sometimes things like that are hard to find online. Like you make this great product, the website, and people don't know
Yeah.
about it.
Where? Yeah.
So doing the motion and the printing of it, and getting it distributed out to places, like that could be part of the project too.
Mhm.
I don't know, it's a great resource. Have I ever shown you Irma? Um, we have a few minutes. Can I borrow your thing again? Okay. So if I can figure it out. The integrated resource management applications, because the federal government and acronyms. The Irma portal. This is where, so when we fund a grant for somebody, at the end of the project, you have to submit a product to us. It has to be something tangible. So it could be just like a workshop or a conference or something like that. But a lot of times we want the National Register nomination, the brochure, the coloring book, the survey report, whatever it is, so that we have an actual product. And if it is a product like that we can share with them, then we send it to the Park Service and they upload it to this data portal. And I'm trying to find where I can find this. I had it, of course, on my computer. But there is a way to find these. I guess maybe I'll just do this search. There's a place where you can search. I mean, I can search here, but just type in guideline. So all of those products are saved here. So if you guys were doing like, let's say design guidelines, let me see if I could do. Prehistoric life in the national parks environments, but you can also, I think they changed something. There's a way that you can filter by like which program.
Become a junior preservationist.
Yeah. And so you can just look for Historic Preservation Fund grants and then see what kind of products have been funded. And so you can just like search through there and get all these ideas. Tiny Tanya asks a big question.
Would like even a book for kids to walk around their own neighborhoods, and find interesting stuff, such and such. And then if they could, well, of course, the coloring, it's the printed coloring book. It's
some of these are like park stuff. I'm trying to like think of. Oh, I think maybe I can put HPF. No. Anyway, I'm not finding the right place for where I can show you this to you, the guys, the way I was going to show it to you, but it's the data store.
So Katrina, have you had any luck on the state level or with CLG communities doing realtor workshops? We used to do those and then we got to where we wouldn't have anybody come anymore. So I just started going to the board of realtors when they have their meetings. But I didn't know if that was still a thing, if anybody was having any luck with that or.
Nobody recently has come to us with that. And the ones that I remember Kathy Morgan tried to do one in Wichita one time, the same thing, like she couldn't get anybody to come. So we were talking about, I think at break, my concept for the state is that I think we have to go to them because I don't think we're going to get them to come to us.
Yeah.
So I would reach out to like if they're doing
I go to their
or something.
Yeah,
or
when they do their
meeting. Yeah. So I found what I was looking for. I'll send you guys this link, but if you do the quick search, then you can search by unit and just ignore all of these various national parks and go down to Historic Preservation Fund. Too many. Historic Preservation Fund. And if you search all, but you can also search for specific types or keywords. And I was playing around with this the other day and you can do this where you can get the different types. So there's books and.
I saw a walking tour pamphlet on there before you did it for Nampa. I think I saw that in Nampa.
Yeah.
If it's
There's books, brochures.
I think the only thing that comes to mind that we haven't talked about yet, that we've talked about in the past is, and I don't know how to do this, but we have something about economic hardships in our chapter 22, but we don't have any funds or grants or anything associated with that.
So how to get funding for the Historic Preservation Fund?
Yeah. Is
Do
it?
y'all do sub-grants, Katrina? Do they have to be National Register properties?
To get federal funding, they would have to be National Register properties, yeah. But you can do subgrants, like you guys could apply for $50,000 as a pool. And the project that you're doing is that you're gonna give out 10 $5,000 grants. But they would have to be to National Register properties, yeah. The other ideas that have, Hutchinson did this was they used their grant funding to hire an architect. And then their services were free to the property owners, like up to a certain amount or a certain number of hours or something. So you could offer that to applicants who are coming before you guys to present, they want to do something to their porch, but they don't have the funding to.
And we said it's not meeting our.
Right, and you're like, here, go talk to this architect and he will draw it up for you.
Just send them all the.
They say I bought that set of plans from Home Depot for $99. and I can edit it.
Yeah.
I mean,
Right, or they just don't have the wherewithal to give you like,
Delicious.
the window specs that you need to really figure out if this window is gonna be appropriate or something.
Yeah.
Or same concept, hire an engineer to go through and assess like structural integrity of multiple properties in a certain area or something.
Right, because sometimes that is why properties get into that maintenance issue of deferred maintenance not done, but not always. I mean, sometimes.
I haven't seen it done in Kansas, but in other states, they've also done like energy assessments. So hire someone who does energy assessments and give basically, it's almost like giving a grant, but give their services for, have people apply to get a free energy audit. It has to be a historic property and whatever you guys set up criteria.
Fall below a certain maximum income level though to get that.
And you guys could set that up. Yeah. You could have your own grant program or however you wanted to do it. Target certain areas or certain property types or. Yeah.
You need a defendant engineer, sort of, so to speak, because everybody there's always a case of it'll be cheaper to destroy this and build up. And that's easy to write a letter.
Yeah, no, it would be great to have an engineer on call.
No,
Yeah.
It would cost
Yeah.
15 grand.
Yeah.
You're wrong.
It's out of date probably now, but Hutchinson also did this thing where. So their Historic Resources Commission was having a hard time. People were coming to them and saying, well, I have to have vinyl windows because it's too expensive to repair windows I have, or it's too expensive to get, a good replacement or whatever. And they just didn't feel qualified to assess that because they're like, well, we don't know. And so they hired Bob Yap, but he created like a cost comparison tool. And it was just like an Excel spreadsheet, but it was like you typed in like the size of the window. And he had a couple other things on there too, and then it laid out like what the average cost was for like repair, replacement with this, and then like the life expectancy. And like all these things, the payback as far as how long it would take to get the cost recouped, it's really good and it helped. But of course, it needs to be updated every so often.
See, something like that statewide would be so fabulous. I mean, I know prices might change in different towns, but I just think that'd be great. Because one of the things I didn't, housewarming for Candy Davis's, Dennis had done the paint house and he talked windows being paint, which he said really expensive, but it's going to last. a whole lot longer.
To find out.
And it now, and the price is, and it would be prohibited now, but I mean, some paint, you know what I mean? Like just oil based as opposed to all the other kinds of house paints they have now, you know?
Yep.
That would be interesting to do a whole comparative of window treatments.
Lots of ideas. Anything else? Anybody wrap up wise?
This looks great. Thanks.
Yeah, very important, very necessary. I so appreciate just talking.
I think our next step will be for staff to put together some summary information and then try to come up with a plan to bring to you on how to systematically survey or start a survey program for the city. I think that's probably, and then we'll have all these other grant ideas. One that you might want to get, and we'll bring this to a public hearing so you can have public discourse and public comment on it, would be the letter request that you got about municipal stadium. You'll need to take some action on that, whether to table it for later, whether to initiate a national register nomination, whatever you decide you want to do. But we'll bring that to you probably in June so you can take some type of action on it.
I can't come to June. But I'd like to weigh in.
Won't be at the June meeting.
We won't have the analysis of this meeting and the survey program for in June. That will be, it'll take us a while to put all that together, so.
Any news on a 7th board member?
Was not on Tuesday. But First Presbyterian Church is.
Is there a qualification for that seventh person? Like
The replacement, it was building trades was the previous person, but the way the ordinance is written, there's a list of people that it could be as far as qualifications
I feel
go.
like we need to recruit